of the City Council. My name is Stan Jezerski, and I'm going to be filling in today for our Mayor Castriata, who is taking a well-deserved vacation. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have everyone here today as well, and those that are watching online. Agendas for the study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at www.broomfield.org. So our agenda this evening includes one concept review and 2 study session items. The public may attend tonight's meeting and future council meetings in person at the George DeCiro City and County Buildings City Council Chambers, right here, located at 1 Daycombs Drive. Or you may also watch it on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website. The public may also participate in the public comment tonight on the concept review item, the first item that we'll have tonight, and only on that item. And you may comment either in person or by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3. That will place you in the queue for comments. Public comments is limited to 90 minutes per item, and individuals who are attending in person will speak first. I don't anticipate having any issues tonight, but we may limit comments below 3 minutes if we do have more than 15 callers. Again, if you're joining virtually for public comments, the number is 855-695-3744, and you do press *3 to be placed in the queue. Screeners will ask the callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item that the caller would like to comment on. Please call several minutes before the agenda item and press *3 to ensure that you are in the queue for comments. And if you're joining in person, we just ask that you come to the podium, state your name and neighborhood for the record. So getting started on our first item, we have a concept review for Ziggy's Coffee. This is a proposal for Ziggy's Coffee, which is a drive-through coffee shop. It's going to be located within the Jeffco Business Center. We will follow the city's standard procedures for the concept plan reviews. First, we will have our staff present a summary of the application. Following the staff summary, the applicant will make their presentation. We will then take comments from members of our Land Use Review Commission and any other advisory boards that we have. Then the applicant will have the opportunity for final comments. And finally, we'll have questions and comments from our City Council. Electronic copies of the concept review plans are available at broomfieldvoice.com, and copies of comments provided for each of our plans at broomfieldvoice.com have been provided to the City Council and can be found by clicking the corresponding link at the bottom of tonight's agenda. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum for this proposal, and I will ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, Council. Good evening, community. Kayla Tift will walk us through this item. Ms. Tift.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. The applicant this evening has submitted a concept plan for a 624 square foot coffee shop with a drive-through lane within the Jeffco Business Center Replat C Lot 1 subdivision. Next slide, please. The proposed coffee shop will have an outdoor seating area, a walk-up window, and a drive-through lane. The establishment will serve coffee, beverages, smoothies, and limited food options. A drive-through restaurant is not allowed according to the Jeffco Business Center PUD plan, so the applicant will be requesting a planned unit development amendment to allow for the drive-through use. The proposed building will be 22.5 feet in height and will feature an architectural style that is consistent with approved buildings in the area. Next slide, please. The 0.89 acre property is located to the south of West 116th Circle and to the west of Wadsworth Parkway. The parcel is part of the larger site development plan, Jeffco Business Center filing number 1, which was approved in 2000. The property was also subject to the Jeffco Business Center Replat C final plat, which was approved in August of 2020. The overall SDP and final plat has established the internal drive network and lot configuration. To the east of the subject property is a Vector Bank, which is also located within the Jeffco Business Center Replat C final plat, approved in August of 2020. To the west of the property is the City Bark, approved in July of 2019. And to the north of the subject parcel is an animal hospital / dog care facility, and an automotive service center. Next slide, please. The Broomfield Comprehensive Plan designation for the area is commercial. The proposed coffee shop use is consistent with this designation. Next slide, please. The main access point to the site will be at the northeastern portion of the lot, with the main entrance to the drive-through to the northwest. The drive-through wraps around the southern side of the building and exits toward the northeast portion of the property. Parking will be featured in the center of the lot to the west of the building, with the outdoor seating area wrapping the northwestern portion of the building. Pedestrian connections to the sidewalk to the north along West 116 Circle will be provided. Staff will work with the applicant to ensure the formal landscaping plan will supplement the existing streetscape and comply with Broomfield standards. Next slide, please. The 22.5-foot tall contemporary style building will be wood framed, clad predominantly with a synthetic stucco finish and accented with horizontal steel siding and stone wainscot. The building utilizes a neutral color scheme, which is consistent with the approved buildings within the Jeffco Business Center planned unit development. Signage will be reviewed at the time of formal submittal. Next slide, please. The City and County of Broomfield standard public notice requirements have been met for this case. Staff has identified one key issue with the conceptual proposal, which is the consistency with the Jeffco Business Center planned unit development. According to the Jeffco Business Center PUD plan, fast food uses are not a permitted use for the area. Any restaurant that includes a drive-through would be classified as fast food and is not permitted. The applicant will need to request a PUD amendment to allow for the drive-through use. Thank you, and that concludes the staff summary.
Thank you for that presentation. The applicant's presentation is next. Will the applicant's representatives please identify themselves for our listeners before joining your brief presentation this evening?
Good evening. My name is Nick Bruga. I'm with MEH Architectural Group, and I'm here with Michael Hunsinger, the principal of the architectural firm, and Melissa Livingston, the owner for the proposal. So Kayla did a great job of introducing the project, so I'll try to be too duplicative. Our site plan, as you can see, we have left in, right in, turn and access from West 116 Circle. Exit from the site is the same, left in or left out, right out, whatever you prefer. We have the site has accommodated 19-car stack, pretty significant stack relative to our other locations. Sidewalk connection comes in off of the existing sidewalk at West 116 Circle, cuts through landscaping across the drive lane and into our patio. Pedestrian connectivity has long been a cornerstone of the Ziggy's brand, so it's something that we try to incorporate here to the best of our ability. Parking on the site, we're providing 10 parking spaces along with one accessible space. We are offering a 3-bike bicycle rack, similar to pedestrian access. Bicycle connectivity is equally part of the brand and something that Ziggy's encourages. Covered patio seating, which you'll see in some of our elevations you've already seen in the rendering. It's a built-in canopy structure, just giving a bit more of an intimate and localized setting to the patio, a bit of a more, closed-in, intimate patio setting. Next slide, please. Just to touch a little on the pedestrian users who I anticipate using this site. Just touching on some of the adjacent users. There's City Bark, as Kayla talked about. There's a few pet grooming, pet daycare sort of options. Peerless Tire Center. Ledge Swap Tire. Cortland Apartments across the street. Dexter Bank right next door. It's a lot of the customers are in there, kind of in the midst of their daily errands, and we anticipate that coming, doing their errand, waiting for their tire to be changed, going to the bank, as long as waiting there, dropping your pets off. People may walk across to access the Ziggy services. Otherwise, the vast majority of the business comes from the drive-through lane, circulate on the Wadsworth corridor next door. Next slide, please. To the perspectives you've seen already, I just want to point out a few Few features: drive-through window, we have a walk-up window accessible from the patio. The built-in covered patio seating I touched on before. We have decorative light fixtures. And as far as the materiality of the building, it's a stone wainscot wraps the building, with the exception of the rear entranceway. And we have a canted metal feature there. 360-degree architecture is something that we've taken into consideration in many of our Ziggy's projects, so it's something that we're consistent with here. Three-tone ephes exterior with regular joints to break up any long planes that may otherwise be undesirable. Metal parapet cap with custom profile wraps the building, and then the standing seam metal accent feature in the back as well. So no side is left untaken care of. Next slide, please. Just a few of the elevations here. The window up top is not a walk-up window, that was just a fixed window. The patio side is opposite the drive-through window. And the east elevation, the bottom, that's showing the elevation from the drive-through side. Again, you have the drive-through window, you have a fixed window. Next slide, please. And the other elevations, you have the standing seam metal accent feature in the back. And then the west elevation, the bottom, is from the patio. Walk-up window, fixed window, covered canopy structure. That's it. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Is that the end of your presentation?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any members of the Land Use Review Commission present who would like to comment on this proposal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, City Council, Earl Franz, Land Use Review Committee. If you wouldn't mind, if you could put the very first slide in our presentation, the city presentation, back up with the original site layout. Yeah, you can look on the right. Obviously that line that comes down from the north, that I assume is the sidewalk. And of course, there's not a sidewalk there yet, but there will be. So that'll be the entrance if you're walking, because you got a lot of businesses right in proximity. You can walk there, right? And then next question I had was just about the outside seating area. That's the one with the little X's that are right by the building. If you look at that, it's right. That seating area is right adjacent to the entrance and the exit of your drive-in. And I would think, and right at the top of that, that you're going to be right next to the car exhaust coming in and going out. And I didn't know why that couldn't be moved just a little bit south. So the top of it was a little bit further from the exit, blocking the building, and a little bit further from the entrance. And then finally, I know you mentioned about sustainability and look at EV charging stations. But I just wondered if you considered some other things. I know you have a lot of things to go forward in the future, but anything about solar, anything about xeriscaping. I don't know if you'd ever consider any LEED certification on that building, which I think is small enough that might be possible, but it'd be interesting to hear your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franz. Are there other members of the Land Use Review Commission who would like to comment?
Good evening, Fred Weiss, member of the Land Use Review Committee or Commission. Couple of things. I guess since I've built over 100+ Dunkin' Donuts, I have a little bit of expertise when it comes to coffee shops. And I had a couple of questions. The drive-through, although Broomfield doesn't require it, is a 19-car stack with no possibility of escape. So something that you might consider if you're 18th in line and you got to get somewhere else, an escape might be a good thing to consider. And there again, I realize Broomfield doesn't require it, but I think it's something that you might want to consider from a customer service perspective and also a safety perspective. If somebody wants to get out of there for some reason, they really can't do that because there is no way to escape in the drive-through, at least what I can tell from the site plan. the signage, and I realize that's not part of this review, but something when you're looking at the package, is I would try, if you can, to get some sort of pylon sign. And the reason I say that is because the way the building is situated, you're not able to see it from Wadsworth because there's a building that's blocking it. So once again, the coffee business, at least the one I'm used to, is built on impulse. And the more signage you can get and the less the building can be seen, I think the impulse would be better if you can get some sort of a pylon sign, if you can work that into the package. The only other thing I thought, could I get the elevations, please? Is the top elevation, is that a single drive-through building or is that a double?
It's a single drive.
It is, okay, because it kind of looked to me like it might have been a double, and that's what I thought the building was a single, so that, you just clarified that. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Any additional comments from the Land Use Review Commission? Seeing none, are there any other boards or commissions would like to comment on this proposal? Looks like we have none on that as well, so public comments are next. As mentioned earlier, the public may comment both in person or via phone. If you're joining via phone and want to be placed in the queue for comment, please call again 855-695-3744 and press *3. If you're joining in person, please line up behind the podium. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Anyone that would like to comment on this item?
Hi, Roxy Jewell, Lockmore. I do business through Ziggy's, so I think they'd be a great addition to our Broomfield economy and to Broomfield itself. Thank you.
Mr. Any members of the public present here tonight that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, we will go to for any individuals joining via phone. And again, press *3 to be heard if you'd like to comment on this item. It does not look like we have anyone in the queue for phone comments as well. So we're moving right along, and we will ask the applicant if they'd like to respond to the comments you heard from our Land Use Review Commission.
Yeah, I can absolutely touch on a few of the things brought up. First of all, I'd like to thank the gentleman for bringing up the opportunity to provide signage. I think that's a great idea. We'll look into doing something like that. Regarding the sustainability concerns also brought up, as far as EV connection, future connections, solar panels, things like that, we don't have anything planned at this time, but whatever we can do to accommodate a Ziggy's coffee that works for Broomfield as well as for Ziggy's would be absolutely willing to consider. I think I covered most of that. Everything. Same thing, but we'd be happy to look at anything that would help advance this project. Outside seating area, yeah. So if I was understanding the comment correctly, it was the drive-through lane that would provide exhaust that would be unpleasant for the customers. So the patio is opposite the building from the drive-through. There's the drive-through lane comes in on the west side. There's the parking lot, and then there's the patio, and the building separates the patio from the drive-through lane. So anything you're getting is mostly from the parking lot, if anything, but not from the drive-through lane. Hopefully that clears it up.
I think you hit most of those there, so do appreciate those clarifications, and then we'll have our council here now. We'll be able to make some more comments, and we want to respond to those as well. Sure. So we'll ask the question: does any member of the City Council have any questions or comments on this item? Who wants to start? Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. There was one question about if there's a long line and the exit. Can you address that one, please?
Yeah, that was identified by Kayla as well as a possibility to consider. It is possible. It would be a little bit difficult. We'd have to manipulate this site. We'd be losing some parking, which is already a concern of its own. Possibly we could just reduce that stack, but that has a kind of adverse effect on spilling out traffic into West 116th Circle. So it's something that we can absolutely look at. It's something that I'm not 100% sure the site can facilitate in its current configuration. Maybe we'd have to move some things around to make that happen, but it's something that we can do and something that we don't want to cause or create an obstacle in where this project proceeds. So at this time, not sure, but it's totally something that we could try to fit in.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing your business to Broomfield. I would visit Longmont quite frequently, and it was nice to have individually owned coffee shop to attend to. I think this project's great. I'm not too concerned. I mean, some of the drive-through that we've been in don't have, the ability to walk out. I think Cane's might be one of them where you can't, once you're in, you're in. But that's not a deal breaker for me. I think it's great. I look forward to having another coffee shop in Broomfield. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tessier. Councilmember Grimm is next.
Sure, thank you. I too, when I was sitting up here and you said there was 19 car stack, I kind of felt claustrophobic because I've been in the emergency situation where I needed to leave and couldn't. So I would say just for the sake of your customers and maybe your marketing, I would consider looking at that. I'm not going to make it a requirement, but I think it's something that you should consider. And then I think you mentioned covered patio, but I didn't see it in the picture. Did I miss covered patio in the picture?
It was in the elevations as well as in the rendering.
Oh, okay.
Whichever we can pull it up.
One of the pictures I saw was just kind of straight on and I didn't see it covered, so.
Yeah, so in the north elevation at the top, the left side is the drive-through lane side and the right side is the patio. And on the east elevation, you can see that's from what you're looking at the east elevation is the drive-through side, but it's effectively the same thing on the other side where on the right side there, you see the two dark brown columns that are supporting the canopy.
So there's no indoor seating?
That's correct.
Okay, because, pretty much Colorado, 7 months out of the year is older, blistering hot. So I think indoor seating would be beneficial, but again, I think it's part of your marketing scheme, and I bet you're catering to the commuters. So I get that. But what kind of food are you going to serve? Because that's my next question for staff would be about the fast food.
Sure, it's typical breakfast kind of things. Nothing is cooked or prepared on site. It's all done in an off-site facility. So you have, microwavable burritos, they heat that up for you. There's some sandwiches, things like that, just miscellaneous breakfast, deli kind of food. Again, pre-made, nothing's cooked on site. Just comes out of deli case, sometimes it's heated up, sometimes it's served chilled.
So I guess my next question would be for staff in regards to other parcels in this land use. Have we had any previous requests for fast food use and that we've turned down because of that PUD requirement?
Thank you, Councilmember Anna Burton-Zetti, Planning Director. There aren't any specifically that I know have come through concept review and received a negative feedback in this area. We could have received phone calls and inquiries from someone who would then find out it's not a permitted use and may not have proceeded, but not that I recall.
Coming to fast food, just a block or so away from there, but it's a different parcel, right?
Correct. Immediately to the north, there's a different PUD plan, and I believe there's a Wendy's there, and we've seen some other proposals in that area. But again, different PUD plan for, so different permitted uses.
Sure. Okay. So I guess for this concept, I like the drive-through. I think it's an excellent area for a business or workplace drive-through, grab a coffee. There's a lot of underserved facilities. I work over there when I was not under COVID. I'm still working at home, but that's where my office is located. And there's not too many places nearby to go grab something. So I know it's an underdeveloped area for something like this, and I think it would fit. And I really thank you for considering Broomfield, and hopefully it works out. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councilmember Groom. Next up is Councilmember Lindsted.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, thank you for bringing this to Broomfield. I'm excited about it. I have no problem with the PUD amendment to allow fast food there. You know, you already have a brewery full of food trucks across the street anyways. So I think this totally fits the area and will be a really nice addition to our community. So I look forward to seeing this come forward, and please work with our land use review committee's comments as diligently as you can, and I look forward to seeing this come forward in the next step. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindsted. Any other comments from the City Council? Councilmember Chef.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So thanks for bringing this proposal forward. You know, I've heard many desires in our community to have more food and beverage options, and I think that this fills some of that need. So I'm glad to see this come forward. Seeing some of your other locations, like Councilmember Groom, I was surprised that there was only outdoor seating with this location, but you know, some of that does make sense in terms of what you're looking at. So you know, I hope that it does work to have that only outdoor space. Looking at that outdoor space, that covered patio, it is opposite of that drive-through. Thanks for clarifying that. I was curious, is that space flexible enough in order to remove that patio and put in additional drive-through at a future date? I mean, is that part of the thinking there, or is that something that's, you know, really not going to happen?
That is certainly not part of the thinking. There is no plan to do something like that. There are some locations that do have a double drive-through lane, but the patio, you know, pedestrian-friendly incorporation from the neighborhood, that's a big part of the Ziggy's brand. It's something that I don't think they're very flexible on. That's pretty important. And in this case, I think it also is fitting for the neighborhood. I know I touched a bit on the kind of users around it and kind of pedestrians that may be coming from those uses. And if they're, you know, waiting for their tire to get changed across the street, there's a post office down on the opposite side of the circle, you know, bank next to it. Sometimes you look for a place to sit and have a drink. The second drive-through lane, I don't think you get that anymore. So
okay, that's great to hear. I'm glad that that's the case. How much possible seating is going to be under that covered patio area?
It's loose furniture. Nothing's built in. Typically, I think we see around 4 to 5 tables, each with 4 to 5 seats or 4 seats, somewhere in that neighborhood. But I'm unclear. And also, you know, it's not necessarily dependent on the area underneath the covered patio so much as it is on the amount of patio the site allows for. In this case, it's a decent sized patio. So if necessary, more tables and seats can be added.
Okay, great. I mean, that's all great to hear. I think that, you know, in our kind of post, you know, pandemic recovery, I think that more businesses are going to be having that kind of open air atmosphere. And that's going to be, you know, here in the Colorado weather, you know, both cold, snow, and all the above. So I think that that's great to see that this is really kind of being incorporating some of those ideas. The last question I have is regarding the Jeffco Business Park PUD changes. Has there been any conversation between your business and those other owners and other businesses there to see kind of what, you know, what their thinking is in terms of would they be on board with this change, or is there going to be any opposition?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been.
There hasn't been any conversation or opposition.
Hi, my name is Michael Quincy with MAH Architectural Group. We've had some conversations with Becker Bank. They're the seller of the property, and they're definitely a proponent of it. as well as First Industrial Realty, they're definitely a proponent of the project. But as far as specifically having a conversation with the other users out there, there hasn't been that conversation yet.
Okay, all right, well, that helps. I would hope that isn't going to be opposition to it. It seems like a good fit in this area, so I hope that it does continue to move forward. So thanks for bringing this project forward and look forward to seeing the application come later. Thanks. That's all I have, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Sheff. Any other comments from City Council? Looks like there aren't any other comments, so yeah, thank you for coming to Broomfield and bringing this project before us tonight. Not many comments or concerns, so that's a good thing for you guys. And it means you have a good project. So a couple of things you did here was sustainability is always an issue with us on City Council now, so keep that in mind when you bring that forward. The drive-through obviously was brought up a couple times and signage, so not many concerns. It's a good project, and as you heard, I think it's a great location. Probably does fit pretty well with the other businesses in that business park. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing the next phase of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. So our next item on our agenda tonight is the homelessness update. This is going to be an outline of the proposed next steps and a timeline for our comprehensive approach. This is an update on individuals experiencing homelessness, including proposed next steps and a timeline, like I said, for a comprehensive approach. Before the staff presentation, we do want to remind the residents here tonight that although we will not have public comments on this study session item, there will be an opportunity for the public to engage on this topic next Thursday, September 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. This is going to be during the panel on homelessness and housing for all. To learn more about this panel that we're going to be having, please visit the broomfieldvoice.com/homelessness. And we do hope everyone that's in the audience tonight will join us for this important conversation. So tonight, the council has a copy of our agenda memorandum, and we're going to ask staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Dan Casey, Director of Human Services, Christina Penyon-Helm from our Attorney's Office, and Commander Kurt Witterquist, that will be representing PD. We're going to go through this presentation. Again, tonight is really focused on what the enforcement aspect from the last conversation that we had, where we are in that process, how many individuals are in that pipeline with regards to enforcement, how many calls we've had, some of the data regarding that portion of the population. And as Mr. Casey goes through, the second portion will be introducing a long-term comprehensive approach. That conversation starts next Thursday with the panel. The panel is going to be representative of individuals that are doing this work in other communities. I think we can all agree that it is certainly a regional approach that is required. We will have representatives from Boulder, from Adams County. We'll have two affordable housing developers. Part of the conversation after the panel, council members and Mayor Pro Tem, is the allocation of the Arpa funds. And so before those funds are expended, Mr. Casey will also go through when the funds need to be allocated and actually spent, which is 2026. I think we've all seen plenty of examples of having big dollars thrown at an item only to have 2 or 3 years later winding up in the same spot. That is not what we want. And it's not what the community wants. And it's certainly not from an overall comprehensive perspective where we need to spend our time, effort, and energy. But rather, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. As we all know, if you have 5 huge goals, we look around the country, we look at some of our neighbors, there is no magic bullet to solve homelessness. What we do know works is again, a comprehensive regional approach, partnerships in the community, faith-based organization, nonprofits, working in conjunction with the local government. The local government will not solve this problem. It will, again, take from a 10,000-foot view When I say difficult decisions, we need to focus our efforts. So again, we don't come 2 years from now and have done 3 things kind of well, one of those 5 not at all, and one is sitting on the back burner. So what we do know works, Mr. Casey will talk about it a little bit here in a minute, is keeping people from becoming homeless to begin with allows us the best case scenario to provide resources, wraparound services with regards to workforce as well as housing. I know there's a lot of conversations about whether they're Broomfield residents or whether they're not Broomfield residents. If you prioritize individuals that are in this community and keeping them in their current homes, providing the upskills through workforce, we have, this council has brought on more 50 to 80% AMI units than in the history of Broomfield. That has all occurred in the last 18 months. We do not foresee that stopping at any time. Councilmember Tessie and I were just talking in the hallway. As we transition from a city council perspective on home housing to an independent housing authority, that is but another piece of the puzzle that council has indicated is a priority. We're going to be hearing, this is more for the community, we're going to be hearing more about the independent housing authority roles and responsibilities on September 21st. So there are many conversations that are coming with regards to this topic, to this issue. I think the council's made it really clear to the community that this topic requires a tremendous amount of engagement from all of you. So none of us here know the answer. We don't have the silver bullet. We do know that from a long-term, high-level approach, there are systems that work and are effective. We want to make sure that we don't stumble and put good money after bad into a particular portion or project. We want to be able to work with those partners that will, part of them will be on the panel. We have explored many affordable housing, attainable housing. We need to start understanding the difference between those two. We need to start having a common language of costs, goals, and measurement outcomes. Mr. Casey, introduce us to this issue if you would, please.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I'm Dan Casey, the Director of Human Services. And Commander Weaver and I are going to walk you through this presentation this evening. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Just a high-level quick background on where we've come from and where we're going. So on June 29th, there was a study session held to discuss enforcement of the municipal code that prohibits camping in our open spaces and our parks. And in July 19th, we brought back another memo that identified some locations where Broomfield owned property. We're going to do a pilot temporary safe outdoor camping site. And we shifted that approach based on council's feedback and residents' feedback as well. Next slide, please. So as Manager Hoffman discussed just a few moments ago, a comprehensive approach really includes a number of different things that you'll see throughout this presentation that we're going to embark upon. The first one is enforcement. And I think, again, this started with enforcement. So Commander Weederquist will walk you through where we are with that. And then we're going to talk about community engagement, parallel path with council's discussions around the independent housing authority. And then we're going to talk about adjusting and reviewing our current staffing capacity and our resources to ensure that the sustainable foundation for future strategy. That's a lot to say. We really want a comprehensive approach. We want to take some time to think this through and have good community feedback as well. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it off to Commander Weederquist.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening, council.
First thing I want to talk about tonight is the enforcement based off of our municipal code. Jake, if you would choose that one. Our municipal code prohibits camping in public spaces, for example, parks, open space, by any resident or guest without a permit. In order to address this a little more effectively, we started a group called CHART, which is our Campsite Housing Assessment and Response Team. This team, and I'll go into a little bit about who comprises this, but this team monitors and engages with individuals and or families who are experiencing homelessness. And we do that, of course, with dignity and with respect. CHART is a collaborative and multidisciplinary team that includes the police department, health and human services, public health, parks and recreation, senior services, open space, and the city attorney's office. We have a couple of different ways that we're working on so that folks in our community can report homelessness. Currently working on an online reporting form called the Broomfield Encampment Reporting Form. Or you can call the non-emergency number with our dispatch center, which is a 303-438-6400 number. Also, one of the things that we're looking at doing is tracking for future reporting. Keeping track of these forms and these calls for service will give us a little better understanding of where we sit month to month and perhaps even year to year. So when an encampment is reported, the CHART team will follow a comprehensive 4-stage review process. Our goal, of course, is voluntary compliance. Next slide, Jake, please. That 4-stage review process, and I'll just go through it real briefly. We have an initial contact. We use what's called a scout team. Once this campsite's been identified, we'll send some employees out to meet, talk with the camper or campers. Our goal at this point is to staff that with code enforcement, public health, and then whoever else from the CHART team might need to specifically be there for that initial contact. We'll review camp conditions, take some photographs, talk with the campers, provide some notification, education, and some resources that will be available to that individual. We'll begin talking about, at that point, alternative shelter for them. Once we get that initial assessment done and that contact done, we'll come back with everything that we've learned, and we'll meet as a team. The CHART team will meet. We'll discuss the conditions of the camp, determine if there's any concern in terms of public health, safety, or any kind of hazards that might exist there. We'll collaborate on recommendations to issue the individual a 2-day notice if there are health and safety or hazardous concerns in the camp, or a 7-day notice for a regular cleanup to vacate the area. On that third step, we'll do a follow-up response. We'll go back out and meet with the campers. Our effort is going to be to send the same folks out that we sent out the first time. That way we're building that relationship piece and familiarity, take some of the stress out of dealing with that code enforcement, law enforcement piece. On that third step, the response team will provide a written and verbal notice to the individual. And then we will post also a physical notice at the campsite, a public notice. And then again, we're going to offer some alternative solutions for shelter or housing. Step 4, that's the cleanup phase. So after the 7-day notice is expired, we will have a contracted company come in. They'll conduct the cleanup. The response team will observe the cleanup. We will reinforce again alternative housing if they haven't taken advantage of it already. We'll provide a hotel voucher. And then of course we'll complete a report on the site cleanup. Police department
certainly has the authority to issue a summons if that becomes necessary. We want to try and avoid that. I guess earlier voluntary compliance is certainly our goal. But that enforcement piece is certainly something that we can use if it becomes necessary. The next slide, please, Jake. If the process progresses through all 4 steps and cleanup is needed, at some point we'll do just a clearance check on the individual to see if there's any active warrants. We'll typically do that on that initial contact just to make sure that we kind of know who we're dealing with, whether or not there needs to be any concern or special consideration for officer safety. The officer or the unhoused individual will be provided with the option of using the hotel voucher for a maximum of 2 nights. Staff will offer transportation vouchers as needed. And then CHART will continue to collaborate with nonprofit partners, take every opportunity to assist during each one of our contacts. Prior to the implementation of the 4-stage review process, one summons was issued, as you all probably remember, back in May of this year. Since the publication of that memo, or the memo recently, the one-housed individual is currently in our 4-stage review process, and as of today, no hotel vouchers have been offered, no encampments have been reported using the online submission process yet. So I'm going to turn back over to Dan Casey to give you the rest of that presentation. Appreciate your time.
All right, so recommended path for long-term comprehensive collaborative plan. So Jake, if you want to go ahead and give me the next slide. It's going to be a multi-part approach, and the first part is community outreach. On September, or let me back up just 1 second. So community outreach, we don't think is going to be a one and done. We plan on doing community outreach from September through the spring of 22. Our first community conversation, again, as Manager Hoffman pointed out earlier this evening, will be September 16th. And we're going to have specific topics on our Broomfield voice page for folks to submit comments through our online process. And then again, that last bullet, intensive community involvement facilitated by an expert third party to include a custom community engagement approach that will meet the unique needs of Broomfield. And I think that's important, unique needs of Broomfield, so that we can make sure that we're hearing everyone's voice that has some feedback or a part to play in this, or maybe some resources to add. So we're going to make sure that we do a very thorough, comprehensive community outreach. And I keep fogging up my glasses, so I can either wear my mask or my glasses. Next slide, Jake. Part 2 is our parallel path as council reviews the plan to stand up an independent housing authority. There's a September 21st study session to discuss that. And then October 12th council meeting to review the form or to review action to form the independent housing authority. Again, the timeline here is the same, September 21 through spring of 22, as we determine whether we will have an independent housing authority and how that will be comprised and stood up. If council creates an independent housing authority, they would collaborate with the Broomfield Housing Department, Broomfield Human Services, Housing Services, local regional partners to utilize the feedback collected from council and the community to provide updates on programs and solutions that meet the needs of the community. Next slide, Jake. And part 3 is our review of our current organizational structure and future sustainable support for this work. First part of that will be restructuring the Broomfield Housing Division. The second part is the Housing Division will work with the DHS Housing Services to support the newly formed Independent Housing Authority if approved by council. And additional staff from DHS Housing Services and our Self-Sufficiency Division will be repurposed from a vacant FTE to help with rental assistance and our housing choice voucher program. And then successful integration and coordination of the housing division, DHS Housing Services, community development, the housing authority, and our nonprofit partners. And then next slide, Jake. So fiscal impact. Anticipated funds that will be used for these programs would be our county general fund, $500,000 that's provided through the American Rescue Plan Act. And as Manager Hoffman said, those funds need to be obligated by December of 2024 and expended by December of 2026. And an estimated home consortium funds of $400,000 for total funds of $900,000. For the enforcement management, the fiscal impacts, we anticipate being minimal. And that's based on our current need and our past need. Although we do understand that times change and our environment around us is changing daily. So just could be a little bit more than anticipated if we have other circumstances that contribute to that. And then the long-term fiscal impact will be included as part of the comprehensive update to council in the spring of 2022. And then last slide, Jake. So you saw this diagram previously in another study session. And I think I just wanted to conclude what we're talking about with our comprehensive plan from enforcement to fully housed, and thinking about our typology of our unhoused friends in our community. Enforcement really tackles that top piece of the iceberg, if you will. That's our chronic homeless that are sleeping in tents in our parks or our open space. And we want to make sure that we engage with those individuals to get them into our wraparound services. We may or may not be successful, and as Commander Reederquist said, it's voluntary compliance. So we're not sure how successful we would be with our chronically homeless. But that group below in the blue, the episodic, the transitional, the hidden, and the at-risk, they will also be included in this program. So as we start to determine how we essentially address homelessness in Broomfield, we want to make sure that we're addressing all of the groups in the blue as well. So when we talk about the 900,000, that's not just to deal with folks that are camping in our public spaces, but this is to address homelessness from a more comprehensive approach. And I think the important thing to understand is these are all kind of broken out into separate paths, right? So we have our emergency, which would be our cold weather sheltering or our code blue. We have our enforcement, which is when we have to enforce our municipal code. And then we have kind of our, what I refer to as our wraparound process, right? So getting folks housed or keeping them from becoming homeless. And I believe that is the end of the presentation. Jake, next slide. Yeah, so that concludes the staff presentation, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Casey and Commander Reederquist. We do appreciate that staff update.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may I ask Commander Reederquist to come back to the mic? So the one individual that we that is in the pipeline now, we've had several meetings about how best to remain compassionate, yet execute on what the ordinance, all the work that we've been doing for that ordinance. So council and the community needs to be really aware of during that fourth stage, which is where we are right now with the individual. Commander Reederquist in particular has become kind of walking this individual through the path and has become in a lot of communication with this individual's attorney. And part of that, we had a really, really tough conversation today about, on paper, it's very different making decisions while we're at the dais versus what our PD has to do. And when you come to that stage 4, if this individual is not willing to move, there is the piece of we can clean it up. But at what point then, from an enforcement perspective, do the PD take it upon themselves to execute on that ordinance and arrest that person. And so again, this is the piece of the first 4 conversations that we've had about this are all on paper. And now we are to the point of making sure that we're all on the same page moving forward, particularly with the PD. And we're grateful that we have the PD in Broomfield that is so connected to all of these folks. Most of the folks that are homeless are on a first name basis with our PD. Kurt, do you want to talk just a little bit about the conversation that we had today to really personalize this as before we move forward with Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. Thank you. Yeah, it's difficult, when we talk about removing people from what has become their home, and the reasons for having to do that are varied. But for those of us that face these people every day, and as somebody who lives in this community myself, it's still very, very difficult to have that conversation and to say, at some point, we're going to have to move you on, or we're willing to assist with services. When you have to stand on the other side of that person and look them in the eye, it becomes a very real situation, and it's would be difficult. It would be difficult to do this job, I think, without compassion, especially under those circumstances. But I also understand the need that we have to abide and live by certain social rules. I think the important thing that we talked about today was just the humanities, the humanitarian side of this. And as police, certainly we've been down a rough road this last year and a half, and in many cases, probably rightfully so. But your police department is committed to doing things correctly and compassionately, and to spend the time. Just to give you an idea, I'm a division commander. I'm one of 3 people who oversees our patrol division, and I oversee a variety of other disciplines, including the K-9 unit, FSU, Firearm Services unit, our liquor enforcement team. And yet it's so important that I make time to connect with this one individual that we have in our community, try and figure out how we can best provide not only a service, but to do it compassionately and balance that against the expectations of our community. It was a difficult conversation, but I think it was necessary, and it was powerful, and it was a good reminder that these decisions are not made lightly. And when we talk about having to move forward with an enforcement that may involve summonsing or even an arrest, it's important to remember we've done everything we can leading up to that with these folks, and that is certainly a last resort for us.
Thank you, Commander, for that update, and I'm guessing you're going to get a few more questions on that here very shortly. So it is time for council member questions and comments, and I do want to urge my colleagues to keep your comments to the topics that were at hand today, which number 1 was the enforcement update that we received, and then number 2, the approach that's been proposed by our staff, including the outreach, the housing authority, independent, and also the organizational structure restructuring. So with that, who would like to kick us off?
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may, just one additional thing I know council knows this, but for the community members that didn't read the memo, we're having, so the panel is going to be moderated, and we are planning 4 additional community outreach panels and engagements throughout the community. So rather than, although we're starting here with the panel, we'll be going out into the community. We're thinking Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4. Not saying Ward 5 is a standalone, but whatever that combination looks like, we will be disseminating throughout the community in order to gather that feedback before we make recommendations or planning for any kind of expenditures, whether it be capacity, staff, or finances. So we will be doing that up through the first quarter of 2022, and additional information to come.
Thank you. You know, I was going to ask you about that at the end, but since you brought it up, and I know most of the folks in the audience here are probably very interested in this. This panel again is going to be on September 16th from 6 to 8. And can you give just a little more information on who's going to be on the panel, what the format's going to be?
Certainly. So we're going to have 6 representatives, and I don't have it in front of me, so forgive me. I'll be able to give you kind of the basic, the overview. So we have the Adams County Homeward Bound Director that has, again, Adams County is like a lot of communities, although they haven't implemented the plan or executed on their plan. They have gotten to the place where they are focusing their resources, and that is, again, keeping folks in their homes. We understand and we can see the level of wraparound services. It's just so complex, and I just from a council perspective and from a staff perspective, there's about 16 of us that are working on this. Kurt and Dan clearly almost daily. So the representatives are folks that we are familiar with. None of them are not known to us. Dana Scott, actually it's going to be Councilmember Tessier, but Miss Tessier under these circumstances, from Fish. No one knows the community better from an integral perspective than Fish. Fish has helped either rehouse or keep people 730. Councilmember Tessier, is that number correct? 813. 813, thank you. So again, from the grassroots level, they will be here to from the pipeline perspective. And so for those of you that don't know, excuse me, we have a pipeline that's already established out of Dan's shop in Human Services. So we work in conjunction almost daily with Fish with regards to their housing. So we have home funds, we have CBDG funds, then we have an emergency assistance fund that that we tap into. And again, Ms. Farrell, who is a caseworker in Mr. Casey's shop over in Human Services, that's where we're adding that additional repurposed position to assist to then garner additional Section 8 housing vouchers that then brings up the entirety of keeping people in their homes from a housing perspective. So again, now we're deviating a little bit from the homelessness conversation. So Fish will be represented. Marty Dormish. Marty Dormish. I'm going to mess with you all because I'm going to continue to repeat myself. Marty Dormish from the Refuge. Again, the day treatment facility that is just up the street from Friends and Precious Child. Again, the work that they do in the community is deep and rich, and those voices are key as we move forward. Susan Bellis, she's the representative. Any of us that have worked with the mental health providers and community reach, those are our two. They're regional, but specific to Broomfield. They will both be attending. So both of those mental health folks. Abby keeps working on something over here. So we, from the community reach, so we'll have a peer specialist that works on the front line, and then we'll have an individual that works from the 10,000 foot level of kind of the spoken hub perspective. We have the Deputy Director of Housing and Human Services for Boulder, and they're the lead agency for the home funds. So Broomfield participates in a home consortium. We were awarded in conjunction because of our partnership with Home. That's that additional 400,000. So that Broomfield doesn't have that 400,000. That's through the consortium. So we also know that when we say regional partnerships, we don't just mean what they're doing, we can capitalize on. We also mean you can do a lot more with 1.5 million when you're combining those services versus us taking the 400 and doing something individually. So she will be here to help walk us through what some of those home funds look like and what the outcome could be. We have the executive director for the Maker Housing Partners. They are developers that do attainable housing. They moved into affordable housing. Councilmember Tessier and I and our leadership team toured one of their projects that's off of 72nd and Broadway. Adams County was able to donate a pretty good, I think it was 8 acres for this development, but it's in perpetuity. They have on-site services. So a lot of these developers that do attainable and affordable housing, it's not a one and done. So generally they have a presence within that development. Again, the prices go anywhere from 30% of AMI, which is average median income, all the way up to 80%. 60 to 80% is considered affordable. 60% to 30% is generally attainable. And then we have the Adams County that I had mentioned before, the Homeward Adams program. Again, they haven't executed on that program yet, but from a tangible perspective, so we wanted representatives from Broomfield that were Broomfield rich. We wanted individuals that have actually done this instead of just thought about how to do it. And then we wanted folks from the mental health wraparound services perspective. So again, as we move forward, we will continue to adjust the panel, the input, and those relationships. But I can say that the work that has been done overall housing, when this council started work on the Affordable Housing Committee, it really was a jump start into these particular conversations. So now we dive deeper from the housing ordinance, right? The 10 and 20% inclusionary housing ordinance into how do you take that money and now what do you do? What are those measurable outcomes? What are the goals that we need to achieve year by year? Some of the folks on the panel can help us in that conversation as well. Mayor Pro Tem, that was probably a really long answer to what you were hoping. It was just going to be 6 panels, but
That was great work.
there you go.
You just needed to list the names. That was great. Actually, just one quick follow-up though was, can you also just sort of briefly explain what kind of a format the public should expect as well?
You bet. So we're going to have a third-party moderator. So it's not going to be staff. It's going to be council. Your council will probably be here, but they too will be in the audience with you. There are 4 general overview questions that each panel member will answer, and then it'll be open to Q&A. So Q&A will be, I think we're keeping it, and Danae is here. She's really reading it out of the CMO's office. I think it's 7 minutes, Danae, for the panel to make their who they are and what they represent, and again between 7 of them. But the main portion is really we want to start that community feedback and engagement.
Thank you. Okay, now we will now move forward with if any council questions or comments. Councilmember Cohen.
Sorry, waiting for my name to be called.
Okay, Chairman, I won't.
Look at you trying. I just want to say it's somewhat difficult to respond to the memo because we're not at the strategy session. We're at the strategy to come up with the strategy session. So I just wanted to address a couple of things going forward that we titled this memo Homelessness. And I think that's a misnomer in one way, in the sense because today I'm part of the enforcement, we're talking about one individual. A much bigger issue really is housing insecurity, which takes up a much larger portion of our population. If I could note, I was looking at some stats. This year, the one price of one bedroom rents in the Denver metro area is already gone up 15% this year alone. 10% in Denver itself. The number of renters who feel insecure, like they're going to lose their apartment, is 16%. And also in that survey, 27% pay more than half their income to rent, which means they are actually housing insecure. They just don't know it yet. Because that's a risky position to be in, especially as rents continue to increase at this rate. So I hope going forward and I appreciated the iceberg graphic that was in your presentation, that it really is the part we don't see. The homeless part that we get all the reaction to and the fear is the tents and the car, the things that we can see, but we can't see the people who are on the very edge of losing their housing or who are sleeping in their cars or bouncing from house to house and finding housing where they can. So I hope that going forward, we could address this not just as homelessness, but housing insecurity and the issues that are coming, also with the moratorium expiring and other changes to unemployment, that problem could become much more severe very quickly. I also wanted to ask, in terms of looking at the memo, there's a reference to regional approach, but I don't see a structure or infrastructure. I'm curious, is there any kind of ongoing process like Dr. Cog devoted to housing insecurity and homelessness that all of us as municipalities and counties can participate in?
Councilmember Cohen, I think they're working on that. I think a lot of people are talking about it. Again, from conceptual into actually getting people together to whether sharing their best practices, what's worked, what hasn't worked. I think we've all been exposed to a lot of what hasn't worked. And not very many what has worked, at least in the state of Colorado. Councilmember Lindstedt, can you fill us in on any of the Dr. Cog work or any upcoming kind of structured meetings with regards to this issue?
I can. It's not directly through Dr. Cog, but the last couple of years, I think just about every community in the metro region has realized that this needs to be a regional approach that we all try to address. And there's a pretty, I want to say, non-formal group that's formed that I think is on track to become a much more formal regional body to help, allocate resources, make these decisions in a regional way. But yeah, I mean, this was maybe 3 months ago they presented the Dr. Cog body, and it's they were just getting off the ground here. So and I can pull up the name here in a minute in my email, but it's I think a lot of communities are in the same place as Broomfield. As rents get higher and as the pandemic exposes problems that we need to find some solutions to.
Quick clarification for the audience too. Dr. Cog is the Denver Regional Council of Governments, and Councilmember Lindstedt is a representative from Broomfield on that council.
My last question, I'll give up the mic, is in terms of one section of the memo is about reorganization, as well as and I'm probably jumping ahead as far as the housing authority, but I would like to see spelled out maybe what exactly we're trying to solve for in terms of these reorganizations and what that shifting of the deck chair on the deck is supposed to fix. Or is there a problem we're fixing, or is it efficiency, or what exactly is the goal?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Cohen, just so I'm clear, on the housing authority?
No, sorry. I meant to say, I know there's a discussion on creating a housing authority, but the memo also included references to current housing division, different readjustments within the current structure we have.
Yes. So just to give you a sense, so we've had one individual working on housing for the last decade. She essentially has been the housing department. We've had a person in human services. And then we have folks that are in CMO. So we have never had a comprehensive group of individuals, again, from a pipeline perspective. So it's a great opportunity in order for us to utilize effectively the resources that we have. in order to efficiently deliver not only those services, but the units. So we really do think that, again, it's an opportunity now. As you all know, Ms. St. Clair retired, but we were thankful in order, she came back and is helping us navigate with the Independent Housing Authority. So I think until what that structure looks like, Councilmember Cohen, and these conversations with the community about the overall housing plan, then we'll have a much better idea of how to not only prioritize where we need to be from a crisis management perspective, which to your point, unemployment is now gone. And those resources from a housing perspective, with the eviction moratorium not being extended, it's a double whammy. So oftentimes from a reorganization, doing it under stress and pressure is where we are right now. But it's it's a welcomed opportunity. We have the right folks at the table to structure it. I don't know, and we probably won't know for a couple of months if we have the right skill set on staff in order to execute what the goals and missions are after they're determined.
Thank you, Councilmember Cohen. Next is Councilmember Groom.
Thank you. I'll start off, since the presentation started off with enforcement, and Commander Wiedekrest, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to say, I can only imagine the difficult choices you guys go through. It wasn't until you guys put us through the training, I don't even know, about 6 to 8 months ago with guns, that I didn't realize what it took to hold a gun in front of another human, right? And it was really impactful for me to kind of understand what it's like to be in their shoes. So I'm sure that it is a difficult choice to be implementing a lead because of enforcement here. Is there anything that you can disclose without giving too much personal information of why this individual is choosing to stay versus utilizing the housing vouchers and the assistance that we could offer?
Give me a minute to think through that.
Sure.
Because, yeah, there's some, it's a little bit of a minefield. There is a family connection of sorts.
Okay.
That is not an available resource, by the way. There are some other issues that probably should have been.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So I guess in that regards, I know that there's difficult choices, whether I can only assume your choice is to keep the community safe, and the community is safe in this case, and then the individual is also protected, and that's why it's a difficult choice for you. And overall, our code and our enforcement is for the general public, and sometimes it's to peanut butter spread, right? But in regards to parks and open spaces, one of my major concerns is in regards to enforcement. I know our code only addresses certain areas of Broomfield. If an encampment is not in one of those certain areas of Broomfield, can we even start the 4-stage process?
Well, typically where we see a lot of our homeless in Panhandle show up is on business property.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly businesses have the right to trespass people from those areas. We haven't run in, at least to my knowledge, an area or an environment where we've had to or even consider using the 4-step process. Now, that doesn't mean we couldn't. It just isn't something we've seen yet.
So really just to ensure everyone that the 4-step process is absolutely being implemented right now, especially in unsafe conditions. That's a true statement.
And it's being implemented for anyone who's camping on parks or open space areas.
Perfect, thanks. And that's all I have for enforcement. And then going into the $900,000 and the staffing. I'm assuming that's where the 900,000 is coming from. Right now, as you guys mentioned, we've got one individual and no one has taken the offer of the housing or the hotel voucher. And I know we talked before, and I'm a little confused with the 500,000. So the 500,000 was presented with a block of hotel rooms. And then at the end of our discussion, we kind of took a straw man and said, let's do 3 hotels. But we never really attached a new budget to just the 3 rooms versus the block of rooms. And now we're sticking with the 500,000, adding another 400,000. So now we're at 900,000, close to $1 million. And I'm not sure if I see the programs and like, where is the money going? It's definitely not going to the hotel vouchers. And I know you've mentioned wraparound services, but what is the extent of these wraparound services? And are we at $1 million annually? So those are some of the things that I'm looking at, and you might not be ready to talk about it tonight. Again, going with the comment, this is the plan to present the plan, but those are some of the things that I'll be looking for in this almost $1 million ask.
Let me take that one, Mr. Casey. Thank you for that question, Councilmember Groom, and we should have been more clear about, so we're not asking for those funds. That is not on the table. If the 500,000 was the number that was originally proposed, and we backed into that number for the block of 15 rooms. So what generally started the conversation was what has been really successful in Broomfield and throughout our community, and not only our community, but regionally, is the Code Blue. So we participate on the Code Blue, which is the warming centers. And that's really where the hotel vouchers, the amounts came from. The 400,000 is the home funds that's designed to only be spent, so that's not general fund dollars. That's the 400,000 that through the Boulder Consortium, that's Broomfield's portion of it. So they haven't determined either how to spend those funds, nor have we. So there is no ask at this point.
Okay. So why did I see the 500 and the 400 and the 900 total?
Those are
on the slide, right?
Yeah. Again, I think it's more about what was agreed to move forward was the 5. So,
but I don't think we agreed to that. We agreed to 3 hotel rooms.
We're going to take that 500 off.
Again, and I am perfectly fine spending $2 million, right? I just want to see the plan behind it.
Absolutely.
And to make sure that we've got wraparound services that are either 500,000 or $1 million that are going to elevate people.
Make an impact.
Again, going back to your comment, we don't want to put good money against a bad.
Yep.
And so far, and I appreciate all of the staff support and help. And this is not only a Broomfield community problem, but a social problem. We want to make sure that we're helping our community members, we're empowering members to come out of homelessness and out of housing crisis. And I just need to see what that is.
Absolutely. So do we.
Perfect. So that's all I needed to say in regards to how we move forward with that $1 million. And then on the staffing, when we're repurposing that 1 EP, or I think you guys call it FTEs. My whole career I've called it an EP, so I got shipped over the 1 FTE.
Yep.
Is that currently in our budget?
It is.
Okay.
And it has been.
And there's no additional annual at this time?
There's not.
Just repurposing that 1 and then reorganizing. And then this question might be for Mr. Casey, which is regards to how are we connecting that restructure with our workforce programs?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Part of it.
Oh, sorry. I heard somebody else talking. Yeah, so a couple things with the restructure. Yes, we'll add that additional position to help out our amazing Sharon Farrell. And then also, as Manager Hoffman talked about, internally we recognize that we have a pretty disconnected system. So our housing department, our self-sufficiency team, and our workforce team will all be connected through, I guess, just a ongoing conversation around this person's in the pipeline, what services do they need as we, again, as we get into the, the no wrong door process, right? Or the how do we provide services? Those will all be looked at independently and individually. And if that person needs workforce services, we will absolutely connect them with workforce. We do that currently. Anybody that walks through our door that's receiving public assistance or any kind of rental or mortgage assistance, we connect them with that program. And we also, I don't know how deep you want me to get into this, but we can also talk with our other public assistance programs, for instance, our TANF, right? We connect those with entered employment metrics, and that also is connected to our workforce program. So everybody that would come into our pipeline, if you will, for services will be, if needed, connected to our workforce team.
Perfect, thank you. And I have just one more last
You
question.
are over time, so.
Okay, I can come back.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lindstedt.
I wasn't, I didn't have my hand up for comment. I was just going to mention that the group earlier is the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative and Partners, the MDHI, and City Manager Hoffman just alerted us that we are very engaged with this group on the staff level. So that's all I wanted to add.
Councilmember Lim.
I had some specific follow-up questions to the enforcement piece that I think were represented in some of the resident emails. On the encampment form reporting, it has sidewalk listed as a possible location. So, and I think we had a discussion at one time that our ordinance does not prohibit occupation of sidewalks. It only prohibits occupation of open space and parks. So is that true that residents would be reporting people who were on sidewalks as well? And then would there be an enforcement piece to that resulting from our ordinance, which I thought couldn't happen one time?
And I guess that depends on what the original complaint would be on the sidewalk. We haven't had any camping necessarily on sidewalks. Occasionally we get panhandlers on sidewalks. That's usually resolved with just a conversation. So,
Councilmember Lim, if I may, actually, I just leaned over 30 seconds ago to ask Nancy about, excuse me, there was a conversation on council subject to a section 18A about adding language to that enforcement ordinance. Nancy, will you talk just real briefly about that, please?
Absolutely. That was on a July 27th council meeting. And at that time, there wasn't support by council to expand the camping ordinance. But to the point that other laws could be impacted, we do have an obstruction of public ways. So if you can't pass and somebody's on a sidewalk. So it might not be specific to camping, but there could be other behaviors that could result in enforcement. But the contact would still be the same up to that point of enforcement, even though it might not specifically be on public spaces.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. On the encampment reporting form, there's a section where there's an open box where details can be filled in that the resident would report, and it gives examples. What I've heard would be of concern to residents that I thought could be listed as a possible example that should be noted is if they happen to notice hazardous materials in the encampment, because I think, that was at least a concern that was reported early by some residents and what they saw. So that was just a suggestion to say, suggest that as one of the details if a resident were to see that. This was related to screening. And I'm not sure it applies in quite the same way in enforcement. But I think it was asked enough by the public that I'll posit it here. So if we were in enforcement to give an individual a hotel voucher to use for 2 nights, would there be any requirements of that individual? Would that individual be required not to use drugs, not to use alcohol, and to be a resident of Broomfield? Those were the kind of screening issues that were used in a somewhat broader context earlier that I thought should be brought up here.
Sure, yeah, the simple answer is no. We just don't have an enforcement piece for that for a 2-night. It really is an opportunity to get folks some shelter temporarily, get them off the street.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any idea how many pending evictions there are in the court system? We asked that question back in mid-July when we were talking about this, and I think you answered just maybe 2 handfuls or something like that was an estimate. Do we have any clearer idea if there's going to be an increase in that, if there is an increase of that number in the court system that might indicate the issues that are coming forward, the problems that individuals are having?
Dan, do you have that website? I can pull it up pretty quick. I mean, there's here, Abby's got it already. Councilmember Lynn, would you ask your other question and then we can come back with the data on this?
I guess I am concerned, as Councilmember Cohen was alluding to, just the indication of the clear indication of the rise in rental costs and the unemployment benefits ceasing, and just the fact that wages in their inflation, their increase is not kept up at all with the cost of rentals, that we may see, unfortunately, an increase in individuals who would find themselves with no place to go except the open space. So I hope that's not the case, but certainly the factors that may lead to this are not looking too good.
In August, there was 17 cases that were filed in the court.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you. So just for clarification, I'm going to be part of the work session that the panel will be speaking on, but Dana Scott will actually be here for the panel. So I'm just sitting in for her while she's on vacation. And then just a clarification on what affordable is. Affordable is housing is actually the housing that's at 30% AMI to 59, and attainable is 60 to 80, which is considered workforce housing. So I just wanted to make those clarifications. I'm really grateful for this report. I think having a growth mindset for this topic will be paramount to fully address housing and homelessness issues. I think this particular, where we are today, has been a culmination of 5 years of work by our Housing Advisory Committee, our Broomfield Housing Opportunity Coalition, and many of the nonprofits and faith-based communities, along with government, having these communities conversations. I want to note that this is a systemic issue more than a people issue. It's the system that's broken, not the people. And I really appreciate the people first language, where we're defining, putting the person before a diagnosis. I just want to also say that a wraparound approach is one that is strengths-based, meaning the provider capitalizes on family and individual assets. Services are designed for people and family with complex needs and utilizes many partners in the community. These services work best with the individuals and families that experience multiple barriers or comorbidities to remaining unhoused. So these are the folks that we're talking about today. I want to acknowledge the research done by our police department. Kurt, phenomenal work. Thank you. Dan, Jason with public health, your team. This is so, it touches so many of the different parts of the community, social aspect, our public health, our social. So this is a really holistic view and approach. I do have a couple of questions, and then I was going to kind of run through some statistics because I think it's really important for the community to understand that the two main reasons we see homelessness are cost of housing and low wages. So the average rent is in Broomfield is for a studio apartment is $1,708. And that's an increase by 25% from last year. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Broomfield is $1,799. The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Broomfield is $2,200. The minimum wage in Colorado is $12.32. And for those who are tipped employees, it's $9.30 per hour. So those are just some of the statistics that we're dealing with. I have a question for you, Commander Lucas. What is the scenario that you believe will most likely ensue if we arrest this individual? And what will the benefits for the community and the individual? And then I'll have a follow-up question depending on your answer.
I don't anticipate that we'll have to arrest her.
Okay.
That's my hope. And I've had enough conversations with her and her attorney that doesn't seem to be an option at this point. We've had great dialogue. She's shown interest in helping us find her a solution. So I'm encouraged by that, and that's kind of what I would with.
That's fantastic. And I think that, when you put the people first, you can, and we have the patients, we can and kind of lead them to some wraparound services and some stable housing. And the reason why I asked that question is if we were to get into a cycle of arresting and then having the participants just come back, I mean, it costs more for the taxpayers and to criminalize homelessness than it would be to provide housing first models.
Correct.
And I have those statistics, but I don't want to be an encyclopedia right now. But I am happy to talk to anybody in the community about this issue. It is so comprehensive and so complex, and I welcome any dialogue to understand this issue. So we can come together as a community and embrace what is before us and create solutions together. With regard to the CHART program, I think it's a great model, and I definitely want to see this moving forward. And I know there's been some talk about, eventually having the mental health workers along with, some of the other organizations in the community to kind of, assist with that as much as possible. With regard to the Arpa funds, well, this conversation has been in the works for 5 years with regard to whether or not we have an independent housing authority. I think we've had put the Broomfield Housing Advisory Committee in place, and for the last 4.5 years, one of the assessments they were looking at was to determine whether or not we needed an independent housing authority. And I believe they're going to be coming back to council next month to say yes. We do, and they will recommend forward with the Independent Housing Authority. With regard to the ARPA funds, I'm in alignment with Councilmember Graham when she talked about taking off like really a dollar amount and really looking at what it's going to be for that comprehensive approach. I think there was some numbers that are more realistic of, that 2.5 million to really get this up and running for preventative, for the wraparound services, for getting everybody on board. And I think with the regard to the current organizational structure, more to come, right? It's part of the 1, 2, and 3 there. You can't have 1, 2, and 3 without the 1, 2, and 3. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can't have 3 without the 1 or the 2. That it's all a comprehensive approach that if they're not equally addressed, won't get the dessert. It won't have the outcome of truly, and I want to say it's fixing the issue, but certainly addressing the issue to the best of our ability and using our strength-based approach. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Councilmember Tessier. Councilmember Schaft.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I just want to clarify. So you had mentioned that there was 1 summons issued and 1 individual in the 4-stage review process. Are those the same individual or are these separate cases?
They are, Councilmember Schaaf, they are the same person.
Same person. Oh, okay. All right. So we're talking about 1 instance, in the recent existence.
Yes.
Well, that's great to hear that the problem at this point is minimal and that we're setting up a framework that can handle this moving long term. I'm pleased to see that the chart and, part of that framework is that chart model that you all are putting together. I'm glad to see that this is being formed. And, I am looking to see how this is implemented as it continues to go through. And it seems so far that it's been implemented very well. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm excited to see the Independent Housing Authority moving forward. I'm hopeful it's going to get completed this fall. I know that 1 council member up here has been working on this tirelessly for years. So I'm glad to see that this could be completed before she's term limited on council. Community outreach. I'm excited to have this conversation in a very large gatherings and groups. Councilmember Lim and I have talked about the idea of having some smaller Ward 3 community meetings to talk about solutions and about and to gather additional feedback. So if you are a Ward 3 resident and are interested in that, please reach out to Councilmember Lim or myself, and we will go ahead and start moving forward on that. We thought about the idea of being able to have smaller gatherings and smaller group conversations around this. One of the questions that struck me was when we're talking about forums and community feedback, it struck me that perhaps the people that are currently experiencing homelessness or previously have experienced homelessness, could provide a lot of insight and feedback and firsthand knowledge of their experiences. And how are we going about gathering that information from those individuals?
More to come.
Great. I'm glad that that's in the pipeline. I think that, the goal for Broomfield that I see, is to align our community, our programs, our services around one common goal, and that homelessness is rare, it's brief, and non-reoccurring. I think that's my hope. And then I start to look at the funds that we have there. In the council memo, it talked about that staff anticipates the below sources of funding, the $900,000, and anticipates minimal expenditures to include the hotel vouchers and transportation vouchers, hiring a third-party consultant to moderate the community conversation, and then future community outreach. In total, we expect the amount of these line items to be within the city and county manager's authorization approval for funding. So with that being said, can you remind us of the CMO authorization approval funding limit?
Thank you to my left hand over here. It's 200.
Okay, so we would anticipate all of that was stated to be under that $200,000.
Well under,
Okay. So
well under.
I think that just puts it in perspective in terms
Yeah.
of what monies we're actually dealing with. At this point, the money that is most likely secure is going to be the community conversation panel. The consultant who moderate that is going to move forward. The hotel and transportation vouchers, that those have been non-existent at this point or minimal, I think is what you said. So, and then the other piece of that would be the future community outreach portions of that. And so I think that, those are going to be minimal as well. So, I think that, it seems like a large piece of the solution for this is actually keeping folks housed and getting people housed. So it's around housing. So I think that, when we're looking at that $900,000, we need to be looking at housing, spending this money on housing. And what does that mean? And I think that with the Independent Housing Authority, that's going to be crucial, but also, looking to see how this money can be spent on actual housing units. So with that being said, we know that keeping folks housed is preferable. And so what are 2 or 3 programs that currently exist in order to keep those folks housed?
That's such a great question, and one that we appreciate, because it does provide some positive through these conversations. So we have, Mr. Casey, you talk a little bit more about it. You'll continue to hear the name Sharon Farrell, who's really an unsung hero among staff, and who's been a dedicated person between our TBRA funds. Dan, help us understand TBRA funds, the emergency housing funds, and then from CCOB internal perspective, from the home dollars and CBDG, and how does all of that get back to those, 4 specific problems, pots of money, Councilmember Schaaf, that do exactly that immediate impact. And Dan, also talk a little bit about differentiate between the TBRA funds and the emergency housing funds, and the qualification for each one of those, please.
Sure. So TBRA, or tenant-based rental assistance, is a program that we work through eligibility, and that's also through the consortium. We get funding through the federal government for TBRA. The SSRMA, or self-sufficiency rental and mortgage assistance, is our emergency funding. And that goes towards individuals that are experiencing difficulty in paying their rent. And we can do it up to 3 months or a dollar amount. And standing here right now, I can't remember what that dollar amount is. So that's actual general fund. Those are CCOB dollars. That's not federally funded or state funded for the SSRMA. And then we talk about community services block grant dollars, or CSBG, can go towards rental assistance as well, mortgage assistance. And then community development block grant dollars typically goes towards home repair. It can go towards the hotel vouchers. And again, Cheryl St. Clair, not being here tonight, is really the expert on our CDBG funding. It comes out of our housing shop, not our human services shop. And Jen, I don't remember if there was another one that you wanted me to add in there.
Just the primary difference, Councilmember Schaaf, is that one of the programs, the qualifications that we placed on it initially was that they have to be sustainable. So again, that's why when we talk about the Bridge the Gap program, so that they're, again, it's that kind of that one step away. The car broke down and now you're going to be out, or your kid got sick and you can't do the copay. So it's something that, if not for that circumstance immediately, you're pretty sustainable. You just need that bridge over the gap. And that is one of those areas that if you don't have to meet the qualifications and criteria and reporting from the federal funds, we're able to modify what that internal criteria is. So if you're not sustainable, there doesn't have to be a marked, if you will, if you lost your job and now you have another one, but you're not starting, right? That qualifies as sustainable. We don't have to continue to have that marked for qualification because it's our internal dollars. So again, there's a lot of, within the next 6 months, when we come back to council, after we've done the outreach and engagement and what's working in the high impact areas, because you all allocate those funds, right? Because they're CCOB funds. So when we see external circumstances like the evictions, right? We haven't seen that impact yet. We haven't seen the impact from the unemployment ending. We haven't seen the impact from the evictions ending. And the website, although the court ordered, so there's a lot of evictions that occur that they don't go through court. Probably more that actually occur outside of that court system. So again, all of these numbers, they're just numbers. And so the fact that we have programs that we can modify internally, I would think that we're going to be taking a more modified approach, at least with the TBRA dollars.
And my other question was really around the what somebody becomes unhoused. So, preventing someone from becoming unhoused is one piece, and then someone that becomes unhoused. And that, at that point, the challenges really start to pile up and really start to snowball quickly. And so, looking at what programs exist for those individuals. So, it would be great to, and I thought of both those questions all up here, so I didn't have time to reach out to staff beforehand, but looking to get some of those numbers. What are those programs that exist? What are those funds that are allocated towards those? And then I think that a big part of this is working with our nonprofit community here in Broomfield for those, what type of those programs exist there. Because I think that as we start to look at the situation, it's, kind of what you were talking about, bridge the gap. It's almost fill the gaps, right, in what we're doing. So we have pieces of this already stood up to address the situation, but how are we going to fill in these gaps and what's needed in order to do that? So I think that having the kind of the framework for what programs exist, what the nonprofit communities are doing, what funds are being allocated, and finding where those gaps are in the system to ensure that one, people continue to stay housed, and the other is once they do experience, once they do become unhoused, that we can get them out of that situation as quickly as possible.
Agreed, well said.
Thanks. That's all I got.
Thank you, Councilmember Sheff. Great questions and comments. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I don't think I have any questions to ask at this point. This has been a great discussion. I just want to make sure that our residents know we have received so much feedback on the topic of the housing and the housing insecurity that we are seeing. And we really hope and expect that we'll continue to see this engagement of these forums go forward. It's difficult to weigh in on the specifics right now before the forum. I'm sure that's going to generate far more questions, but I appreciate the work being done to ensure that the allocated funds are being spent wisely. That is so critical at this point to know that we're thinking this through before we start spending those dollars or much those dollars. And I think we find the biggest ways, the ways that have the biggest impact with more affordable means and less reliance on subsidies. That was one of the comments we received today. That I think there's actually so many individuals that they would prefer not to rely on subsidies. I think that message came through in a specific email. And so they're striving to find the ways to do that where everyone can become self-sufficient without that need for subsidies, but we are a long ways from that point. And we received feedback from residents, especially in Anthem Ranch, on the method of providing the chart, in the chart response, and the ability to email with the chart. You can actually email that group to report that housing, because that was a concern of many, is like who to reach out to, and it turns out to not have been needed much yet. But they appreciate knowing that there's a specific place to reach out to, and that process is very well thought out. And I really appreciate the focus on keeping families in their homes. Councilman Tessie has reiterated that so many times, and it has become very clear that the more we can do in that area. And then something I brought up in the last time we discussed this, and I think this remains important, is that we need these intermediary goals and the motivation for individuals to continue on the path towards self-sufficiency, whether it be career enhancement, with something with workforce development, or securing lower cost housing as those options become available, but we need to make sure we actually provide those options and then keep up. So I think that's really it. I look forward to the forum and then hearing feedback at forum and even after. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. Before moving forward with some follow-up comments, I just have one quick question for Commander Weirquest. The woman that is currently in our system right now, I presume she was camping on our open space somewhere. Just wondering where that location was. I'm assuming what your minds want to know.
Can we just say open space? She's in open space.
Open space.
Okay. All right, I will take that for now. Let me follow up with our attorney later on that question. Councilman, we'll have go to, I guess, follow-up comments here. We have Councilmember Groom.
Oh, sure. Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak a second time. My question is as of the latest news today, the city and county of Denver is going to be closing down Civic Park, where a lot of the homeless live or in tents. And what is Broomfield going to do if those individuals move here? Are they going to be processed through our system, or will we be asking Denver to support that?
Councilmember Groom, help me understand. What do you mean processed through our system?
So will we be offering them hotel vouchers and using our refuge and our support system, our 4 points, to get them housing and help? So when they originated in Denver.
Right. So again, it gets back to the resident issue. So one, we do not expect an influx. The 4-stage process is not necessarily seen as an added value from a wraparound services perspective. It's definitely more strictly for that enforcement piece. So if we have anyone, whether they're from Denver or Kentucky or Michigan or Broomfield, that's camping in open space or parks, they will be processed through this same process, and will be offered, after they move through that 4-step process, a hotel voucher for two nights. Because again, Councilmember Groom, from the ordinance perspective, in order to execute on the ordinance, we have to have somewhere else for them to be legally. So we have to be able to say, you can't be here. We're giving you this voucher for you to go somewhere else. We can't tell you to go somewhere else. We're not transporting them. That's where the voucher comes in from the transportation piece. But legally, so again, it's not a service. Legally, we have to check that box. We have to have another place to put them before we say you can't be here.
Okay, so I get that, and I know that that's more on the enforcement side, but we are offering them services, aren't we? So if they come here and we say, here's 2 nights, and do you want to be in our program? Do we offer that to everybody?
So so again, moving through that 4-step process, when the chart team first does the assessment, yes, those people will be, again, we don't provide the wraparound services, but there's an assessment that is done. Why are you here? What are the circumstances? Where did you come from? Again, the fact that we've had this ongoing dialogue now for about 4 months, and we have one person that is in that in that pipeline. So again, regardless of where they come from, they will be treated the same way through this process that a Broomfield resident would be.
And I just think that I want to bring it up, because I do, if they do come from Denver, and Denver is making the choice to move them out of Denver, and they make the choice to come here, I'm just asking what are our pushbacks on the city and county of Denver, since they're not providing the services. So just, and maybe that's how we move forward in our discussions, is when this happens, and I know we've talked about this before. Boulder done a sweep, do we enforce? Denver's done a sweep, do we enforce? We've had these discussions before, and I just want to keep bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely, that's fair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Groom. We're going to go to some additional comments from council members who haven't spoken yet. Councilmember Hinkle.
That's okay. I kept trying to get his attention. I didn't know what kind of fireworks I wanted to send off or to do your first time. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate this conversation, and you guys are asking such great questions up here. I don't have a ton of things to add. This is the tip of the iceberg of what we see. And I know that we actually have members of our unhoused and previously unhoused in this room. So I honor your presence as we step into serving you. I really appreciate all the opportunities for the public to be heard, and glad we are going into the community. That is also very important. I want us to recognize our privilege in being able to have transportation to get here tonight. If you have children, perhaps you have childcare at home. Not everyone has that. And I want to reiterate that the unhoused did not cause our unhoused issues. We're all in this together. Our best answers are keeping people in their homes first to save money, and then to have safe shelter and wraparound services, keeping in mind that no one can concentrate on mental health when they haven't even established safe shelter, food, and basic needs. And everyone wants that certain someone to have keys in hand, and that's our ultimate goal. I also look forward to how we're acting regionally. I think the reason why one or two cities that we can name, I want us to get to the point where we can't name one or two cities in Colorado. I want us to really work as a region, and that's the reason why we can name one or two cities, because we have not been supporting those two cities. I've appreciated the efforts of our PD. You guys are amazing. And also our Health and Human Services. I appreciate this coordinated approach, and we all don't have 100% answers, right? We want to engage, and we just always want to do what is right and what is honorable and, just respectful of the human in front of us. So Sharon Farrell does a great job too. She even teaches budgeting. When I talk about that in our boards and commissions. I've appreciated the chart crew, and I can imagine what kind of coordination that has to take from behind the scenes on getting all those people together. And then you guys are probably always talking together. That has to be a good sort of family situation you guys have going on. And I've appreciated the reporting online. I've had a few people who say they don't want to call the police. So I had another person say there's someone in their car. And so the refuge will actually go out and help serve them too. So this isn't just about open space. This is about people who don't have homes. A few of my constituents, just to give you a heads up, they're just not fans of the public taking pictures and submitting it to the government unless it's describing the location of the person. And I know we have that on that form. But I know you guys are trying the best you can too. So if taking pictures supports this person, then go for it. But I also trust PD's decision on that. So if it doesn't help support the person on open space, then perhaps we rethink this. I had one person say that they called the police numerous times and approached this person on open space. Do we recommend that the public approaches this person? And it seems to be this one same person over and over and over. What are your thoughts on that?
It's kind of a tough question to answer because, we're that kind of a community where we feel like we can approach anybody, especially on our walking path, and have a conversation. It can be a very personal situation for these unhoused folks, and some of them are may even be embarrassed about being approached or even hostile. So I would always kind of recommend maybe against that, or even to call us first and say, have you had contact with this person? Are you aware of this person? If I wanted to offer them something or even just have a conversation, would that be okay? That might be the place to start. I would just caution folks, anytime you walk into someone's camp, you're essentially walking into their home, and it should be respected, I think, in the same way that we each value our own homes. So.
For sure. No, we want to prevent things of trauma. I did have a question, but I don't think we have the answer tonight, but I did have a question on what are the home consortium funds? And I think we answered that we're not quite sure yet.
No, we are sure.
Okay.
So the consortium, so again, those aren't annually allocated. We teamed with Boulder through that consortium and applied for funds through that partnership and was allocated, I think it was 1.6 million. And 400,000 of that is Broomfield's portion.
All right, I'll have some other questions about that further down the road. And just in the future, I think it would be nice, with our ARPA funds to understand what it might cost if we don't move forward with a plan to support those who are housing unstable. I think ultimately, I think we're going to find ourselves needing a strong program for transitional housing. And we're going to need a strong program that really understands the different stages of being unhoused and housing unstable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel. And we do have Councilmember Law Evans, who's been joining us tonight virtually over Zoom. And she has a couple of questions as well.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Very good, thank you. First of all, I wanted to apologize for not being there in person, as I noted to council and staff, but just for the public, there is a possibility that I have COVID in my household, and we wanted to, out of an abundance of caution, just work remotely. So I very much appreciate our new rules and procedures allowing this. So first of all, I want to thank Mr. Casey and Commander Wiederquist for personalizing this so much, and I have so much respect for the patrol officers and whatnot, and the entire church team that go out and talk to these folks. I have seen the one encampment we have, and I absolutely, it's like walking into someone's home. I wasn't looking for it, but I found it one day, and it has, this is kind of an odd thing to say, but it has a homey feel. The occupant has obviously personalized it to their satisfaction. It has a homey feel. So I agree that this is about people, not just numbers and not just evictions and not just homeless sweeps and closing Civic Center Park. This is about people. I want to follow up on some of the comments that Councilmember Groom made, in that this is right now, while we may only have one person that we're talking to, we do have to prep for the future because this is a growing problem. And Manager Hoffman, I guess I'm a little confused. A few moments ago, you said that with the closure of Civic Center Park in Denver, we do not anticipate an influx of additional homeless in our community. But I thought that I understood the last time we talked about this, that the sweeps and whatnot in Denver would have and have had an effect in bringing more homeless to our community. I don't know where they stay. If we're only working with one person camping in the open space, I guess I'd like more clarification on that, Manager Hoffman.
So Councilmember Law Evans, it's actually Abby. Ms. Hoffman had to step out of the room for a moment.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, so we can come back to that if you prefer.
Sure, that'd be fine. If you would just keep track of that. Sure. I wanted to ask Commander Wiederquist. So how does the 4-step approach by the chart team change if we have someone, and I can't think of a better term. I do not mean to be flippant, but I think you'll understand the reference when I say if they're a frequent flyer, if they come back, go through the process, get a voucher, perhaps are absent from our community for a short period of time, and then the cycle starts again. Have you seen that? And what do we anticipate our reaction to be to that sort of behavior if it ever should happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Councilmember Lovins. We haven't seen that yet. We've talked about it in the chart. And some of the things that we've seen our neighboring communities do is to remove some of the privacy barriers that afford some of these folks that privacy they're looking for. It would probably be a larger discussion if we're talking about removing trees or at least trimming them up to sort of take away that safe haven that they kind of get from that and that obscurity from the public view. But we haven't seen that yet, but it is part of our discussion.
Fair enough. I appreciate that answer. I appreciate your straightforward approach. I guess I would just like to have a plan of action for if and when we do see that behavior. So thank you. Along those same lines, when you contact people, and you may have said this and I just haven't heard it, when you contact people who are camping in the open space, do you request identification? Do you request them to identify themselves? And do you check warrants or outstanding violations or anything like that before the chart team progresses through the 4-step process?
It's a great question. It does depend. I mean, sometimes our patrol officers are the first ones that come into contact with these folks if they're responding to a community complaint or perhaps they run upon them themselves. In those circumstances, certainly it's part of our protocol to just do a quick warrant check and make sure that we know who we're talking to. If they have identification or if there's some way that we can identify them, at least preliminarily. Our chart team, we've only done this twice now, so this is sort of a new and unique process. We've talked about it. Certainly identifying the individual is important, but also if we're offering a 2-night stay in a hotel, those folks are going to have a government issued ID, whether it's a passport or a Colorado driver's license or any state driver's license for that matter. So those are some of the things we're working through with that as well.
Right. So you just said something very interesting. I'd like to follow up on that. If they do accept the voucher, they have to have some sort of government ID.
Yeah, most hotels, at least in our experience that we've vetted, require a photo ID.
Right. I understand that. That makes an awful lot of sense. So have you thought of how the process would change if we offer them the voucher, they don't have an ID, so we've offered them a spot, they don't have the ID, do we have the right, and maybe this is a question for Ms. Rogers rather, do we have the right then to say, well, you've got to move on?
Andrew, would you like me to field that?
You can be one. Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
I think we do, Councilmember Livens, but I would, and I'll defer to the commander on this practical point. It's not going to be an absolute situation either way. I think there's times where you can work with hotels on their registry requirements to try to ensure that there's proper identification so they have the information they need. So maybe there can still be assistance so that the person, if they are interested in taking the hotel voucher, can try to stay there. Our effort needs to be to try to offer the person an alternative place to stay. If they don't want to accept it for whatever reason, or they can't accept it, we can provide assistance, but the department can go to enforcement. Now, will they in each situation? It's going to be very fact specific.
Sure. So I guess the last question I would have along these lines is, my preference would be to require an identification as we give them this hotel voucher. That would be very much be my strong preference, because I guess the other thing, and we've touched on this before, is in addition to checking them for warrants and whatnot, I would think if we're going to put them up in a hotel, we would have liability if, for example, they're on the sex offender registry or something like that. I'm sure that hasn't happened yet, but we have to think through all these possibilities, right? So I don't know if Commander Wedequist, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some limitations we have with our privileges with running clearances on people. There's requirements that we can't share that information. So we have to be very careful about what we do with the information we get. Now, a lot of times if they're a registered sex offender, we wouldn't maybe necessarily know that on just an initial warrant search, but more of a criminal history or a deeper dive, and we wouldn't do that unless we had some criminal charges to support that.
I see. So, okay, I guess that's a point that I think needs to be dealt with a little bit, because I have had discussions with community members where, and again, I know that these are long shots, but we do have to think through all of this, where if there's homeless people giving vouchers at a hotel that a family is staying at, if there's a young child, something like that, and this person to whom the city and county of Broomfield has given a voucher is a registered sex offender and should not be staying in proximity to whomever, I think we bear some responsibility for that. Maybe not legally, but I think we bear some responsibility for that. So I guess certainly it hasn't happened yet, but as we go through this process, I'd like that factored into your chart team decision making.
If it makes you feel better, we've had those conversations and we're still working through solutions and maybe what that looks like. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, Commander, that does make me feel better, and I appreciate that very much. And I expected nothing less from you and your folks. So, Manager Hoffman, it's real hard to see on the screen right now, but I assume Manager Hoffman's back, and Mayor Pro Tem, if I could just go back to this, this is my last question before I have one short statement. Why I'm interested in Manager Hoffman's statement from a few moments ago about why we do not expect homeless folks coming into Broomfield with the closure of City Park, when I seem to recall that we did talk about the sweeps in Boulder and Denver some time ago. And that was going to, and I believe it did. I certainly saw more homeless in my neighborhood, have more folks come into Broomfield. So Manager Hoffman, is that something you can address?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Law Evans. I think the level that we were expecting when that occurred in Boulder, I don't think it's an understatement to say we were bracing for the influx. And so again, although from whether it be panhandling or the wandering, the individuals that wander, we wouldn't call or consider that an influx.
Fair enough.
We didn't address those folks. So again, our thought and reasoning and discussions recently that we've had, that it would be a much more graduated, a gradual influx, less from circumstances in Denver or Boulder or any community that's doing the sweeps. And the more impactful will be the double whammy of the eviction moratorium being lifted with the unemployment being lifted.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. I really appreciate that. That was just it didn't match up with what I had heard before. So I really appreciate that. As we go through this, and I'm sorry, what was that?
Just want to let you know that you are out of time, so if you could just a brief wrap up.
Yep. This is the last thing I want to say. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It is hard to hear. Just that as we go through this, I really appreciate the outreach and the public meetings that are being held, because I don't want to discount the thoughts and experiences of our housed residents, for lack of a better term, who do have concerns, and their concerns with this whole process should absolutely be heard and validated, because they are valid. All concerns are valid as we go through this process. So I want to make sure we honor those folks and their concerns as well. So thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem, and staff. I sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Law Evans. So we are a bit past our 8 o'clock usual break time. I do have some follow-up comments from Councilmember Tessier and Councilmember Cohen. Was there going to be anyone else that anticipates having a follow-up comment? Councilmember Linstead? You guys want to just quickly run through this really fast? If we have some brief comments, we could get through this issue before 8:30 hopefully. So we'll go with Councilmember Tessie.
Real quick, I just wanted to touch on the evictions piece that Councilmember Lynn brought up with the data on evictions. It is more comprehensive than just the evictions that actually go through. I can tell you that at Fish, as the housing advocate manager there, we had 26 rent applications come in just over the weekend for rental assistance due to the pandemic and employment. So yes, it's here, it's coming. We're going to see a rise. And thank goodness we have DOLA funds to help with people who don't have the means. And our unemployment is still at 5.1%, which before the pandemic was at 2%, less than 2%. And the other thing is that 41% of the rent requests that we get at Fish come with a demand notice, which is the first process of that eviction process, right? So if the demands aren't met, and I can tell you this, we have some phenomenal landlords in our community, and I am so grateful to witness some of the partnerships that have ensued. Because this is about partnerships. This is about getting landlords the funds that they need. But yeah, 41% of those requests coming in come with a demand notice. So I think that's what we have to look. And then most of those people will either vacate on their own because they are not aware of the help that's out there. So I think we could do more outreach with the legal teams and actually hopefully get more legal teams who are willing to work pro bono for these folks. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tessier. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment, pushing back on some of the comments that because Denver is cleaning up Civic Center, there's going to be a caravan of homeless making a beeline for Broomfield. It just doesn't work that way. One, statistically, and this is one reason housing advocates push against the clearing of encampments, is that high percentage, 80 to 90%, just return and come right back because that's their home, that's their community. And for example, we're dealing with the same one person for 6 months now. They don't leave typically. That doesn't work that way. They also don't have any transportation. There also seems to be the suggestion we're the only ones offering hotel vouchers. That's not the case. Jefferson County and Adams County, for instance, Arvada and other Thornton all have hotel voucher programs for this very purpose. And I also wanted to note that Denver is not just kicking out the homeless. They're cleaning up Civic Center because it's a health hazard. But they have other programs that where they're purchasing a hotel themselves as a housing strategy. And some of you know, and I've mentioned this too many times, I work at Regis University. We're hosting a safe outdoor space for about 45 homeless people who are living in a tent community. And so far very successfully. And Denver is now looking at expanding that program because they feel it's promising as a cost-effective and more humane way to deal with this people who are in transition from being unhoused and getting them back to housing. They've had success of getting their residents back into housing in just a matter of months because they've stabilized in this situation. So please don't fall prey to concerns that homeless from Denver are coming here. I might note that I think, and Councilmember Tessier probably knows better than I, the poverty rate in Broomfield, I think is 4%, something in that department. So that means there's 3,000 plus people here who are having housing insecurity and that we need to worry about them just as much. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Cohen. Councilmember Lindstedt.
Wow, there you go. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I haven't said too much tonight, but I did just want to acknowledge the work that our faith community has been doing in our nonprofit community over the last several years as we've been trying to get our act together in a lot of ways. They've really taken this on with the warming shelters and trying to take on this problem that's only continue to grow. So it's time that our community steps up and joins our nonprofits and our faith community and trying to solve this problem because they're out of energy. I mean, they can't do this on their own. we can't do this without them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that work to start. And then I did have one question for the commander. What, from your experience interacting with the unhoused folks in this community, do you think, just roundabout, do a lot of them experience mental health issues? We haven't talked at all about that tonight, and I just wanted to see what your gut was on the struggles people were dealing with who are currently unhoused.
It's kind of a tough question to answer only because it's a bit subjective and what that looks like. But I can tell you that most of the people that we contact are very present and very aware and can carry on kind of conversations and really actually, I think, enjoy those conversations, right? Because our folks are engaging with them not at an enforcement level, but as kind of an inquiry and kind of trying to gather some information as to what brings you to Broomfield and why here and do you need services? A lot of these folks are just panhandlers, and I suggest, and I don't mean it necessarily derogatorily, it is really their way of life. It's their chosen profession in some cases. So it's harder for me to qualify that. So I don't have a good sense of how I would answer that, if that's at all fair.
That's totally fair. And I just wanted to just acknowledge that the circumstances people are in are different. And, we had some conversation tonight about sex offenders and things of this nature. And I just think we're forgetting a big piece of this puzzle, and it's often a really complicated problem. But the bottom line is it's $1,791 a month for a one-bedroom apartment right now, and we have people making $12 an hour in this community. And the answer isn't simply, oh, go live somewhere cheaper. Well, that's 25, 30, 40 miles away. So it's a problem that's only continuing to grow. And if you're watching as a member of the public and you have some better ideas to help solve this problem, please let us know. But this housing affordability issue is the number one concern of the community from our surveys. It's the number one concern of our business community who can't hire employees. And it's, becoming very visible and much more visible every day. So I just wanted to put that out there and to thank everybody for the really informative and constructive conversation tonight. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstedt. Just want to thank staff, Commander Weidecrest and Mr. Casey for the presentation tonight. Also want to thank my colleagues for the great questions and comments that you had on a very sensitive issue. I didn't hear any concerns with staff's plans going forward, so looking forward to seeing some implementation in the coming months, including, of course, the creation of an independent housing authority. And just a reminder to everyone in our audience that we do have the panel on homelessness and, as Councilmember Cohen mentioned, insecurity as well, housing insecurity. And that's coming up again this next Thursday on September 16th, and that's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us on council. So thank you again, and we will now take a 10-minute break until 8:40. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna get back on the record here, keep things moving right along. Our last item for tonight is a study session on regional transportation update. So we're gonna have our council as a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'm gonna ask staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Sarah Grant, Transportation Extraordinaire. Is going to walk us through this presentation, and I do have to let council know that Sarah has been anointed one of the best presenters out of all of staff. Expectations are high, Councilman, and she's going to knock it out of the park. Ms. Grant.
Good now.
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Thank you for that introduction. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm Sarah Grant, Transportation Manager. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief update on the regional transportation in Broomfield. Annual update is provided each year as a part of council priorities, and we've been doing this since 2017. A memo has been provided, including a summary of our progress on transportation since the adoption of the comp plan and transportation plan at the end of 2016. We covered regional transportation in depth last year, and this evening is an update on some of the key areas for City Council. Next slide, please. So just to quickly, before we dive in, just set the stage, and this is Broomfield's transportation vision adopted by council back in 2016, that we support multimodal transportation, all modes, supporting all ages and abilities, while reducing our dependence on single occupant vehicles and minimizing our environmental impact, all while supporting economic vitality here in Broomfield. And just as a quick reminder, our goals in transportation focus on moving people and goods, not just vehicles. We support all modes of transportation and connectivity within Broomfield and our neighboring communities. We support livable streets that are safe and accessible for all. We had a chance to connect on that topic at our last transportation forum. We also support the integration of land use and transportation to support economic vitality. And all of the above goals I just talked about also tie into our regional transportation planning efforts, and we participate in as mayor, council, and staff participate in to influence regional transportation efforts to increase Broomfield's access to the regional transportation network, and we coordinate with our neighbors. Next slide. Sorry, I kind of went through these already. Next slide, please, and next slide. Thank you. So just to recap, this information is in our Broomfield Transportation Plan. These statistics were a part of the 2016 plan, and the last updated numbers here are back from 2017. This information is from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and they haven't updated those numbers since 2017. So we're looking forward to new sources of this information. Dr. Cog has been looking into this, and so we'll definitely be following their lead. So as the most recent information that we have, just to recap, the graph, the pie chart over there is looking at the average household in Broomfield and how they spend their money. So back in 2017, it was estimated that about 53% of the average household spent 53% of their income on housing and transportation. Of course, this does not account for some of the recent rise in housing that we were speaking of earlier tonight. So I'm just going to focus on the transportation part of this. And back in 2017, the average household was spending about $14,000 a year on transportation costs. We're seeing a slight rise in ownership of vehicles in Broomfield, a slight decrease in annual vehicle miles traveled back in 2017 compared to the information we had when we did our comp plan, and a slight increase in travel time to work, about 28 minutes. Of course, this is all pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. And 86, and just provide some regional context. Before the pandemic, about 86% of our employed Broomfield residents were outside of Broomfield. So every day they were leaving Broomfield, their homes in Broomfield, and going to other communities to work, primarily Denver and Boulder. Next slide, please. And before the pandemic, about 80% of our employed residents were traveling into Broomfield every day. And this is something that we will be monitoring over time to see the pandemic's impact on travel behavior, in particular commuting. Next slide. So as part of the regional transportation update, I wanted to cover first and foremost the US 36 multimodal corridor that opened back in 2016 with bus rapid transit as well as complementary multimodal improvements, bikeway, and other amenities as well. So pre-pandemic, the Flatiron Flyer service starting between Denver and Boulder had 6, actually I believe 7 routes operating at different stations and reached over 3.3 million riders in 2019. And in that same year, we counted over 1,200 cyclists on a single day on bike to work day in Broomfield back in 2019. And that was on the day when Broomfield and Commute Solutions hosted one of the more popular bike to work events in Interlochen East Park, one of the most popular ones in the Denver Metro outside of Civic Center. Last year, ridership dropped to about 10 to 15% of pre-pandemic service. And then that number has actually risen to about 25% of pre-pandemic levels. So we're still seeing pretty low ridership on the US 36 corridor. RTD will be providing an update in a few weeks about changes in ridership. We're expecting to see some changes as people are shifting their commute patterns and as students are going back to school and seeing what impact that has on the overall system. So that's something we're monitoring. Next slide, please. And first and final mile improvements. We've been working on a lot of stuff over the last few years, and there was a study completed before it was opened that highlighted some of the key efforts that Broomfield needed to focus on to support first and final mile access to the US 36 corridor. And some of the things that included, not only overpasses and underpasses, but we're currently right now, we are working on the first bike and ride shelter at Broomfield Station. They're doing under construction right now by RTD. We expect that to be open by November. And the Broomfield Transportation Forum decided to focus their efforts on these priorities, these multimodal priorities. And there's now funding for the remaining 3 bike and ride shelters at Flatiron and Broomfield Station. We are working on that right now as a Broomfield CIP project with that federal funding from Dr. Cog, and we expect that to be open by this time next year. Next slide, please. So shifting over to Northwest Rail. As a quick reminder, the Northwest Rail was proposed as part of the 2004 voter-approved Shucks program. It was proposed to be 41 miles of commuter rail, similar to the Denver A-Line service to Denver Airport. So important to know, it's not light rail, but commuter rail. There were 6 stations originally approved, including one at Flatiron Station in Broomfield. And originally proposed was 55 trains a day, and that would require double tracking as it is shared by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe freight operations. It was proposed to be a diesel multiple unit. And in 2018, RTD estimated that the cost would be over $1 billion, but they were missing some critical information from BNSF to provide an accurate estimate of costs. And at that time, ridership was proposed to be around 5,000 to 6,000 riders a day. But the MCC still has questions about what this ridership is. I'll talk about that in a minute, about what we are doing to reassess that information. Next slide. So the first 6 miles opened up in 2016, and before the pandemic was almost 500,000 riders between the Westminster Station at 72nd and Denver Union Station. So pretty strong ridership, even just with one stop. Next slide, please. What we've been working on with RTD is working on 35 remaining miles between Westminster and Longmont. And we've been working on a peak service plan. So the plan would be 3 one-way trains from Longmont to Denver in the mornings, commuting into Denver, and then 3 hours and 3 trains in the evening. And this would be about 60 to 70 minute travel time, just depending on various factors. And this would generally rely on single track operations, so there would be minimal capital costs involved with this, and we just wanted to see what it would take just to get some bare bones service going. Next slide. So we started those efforts back in 2017 to work on peak rail service and started exploring that with RTD. Now, a lot of things have happened since then. Back in 2018, 2019, the US 36 mayors and commissioners, now known as the Northwest mayors and commissioners, made a commitment to Northwest Rail in recognition of Fast Track's approval. In 2019, the RTD board also adopted a resolution to complete the Fast Tracks and support peak rail service. 2019, staff, RTD staff delivered the Fast Track's Unfinished Corridors report, which was board directed at that time when they made the commitment to complete Northwest Rail and the Fast Tracks. Following that, the MCC and RTD continued conversations with BNSF to more fully understand these unknown costs. And BNSF requested funding to further study the service, which is why there's still a big question mark around what that actual cost would be. In 2020, after the pandemic hit, the Northwest MCC also successfully protected the Fast Track's internal savings account. Broomfield was a part of that effort, and that's also known as the FISA. And this was started way back in 2012 to set aside some funds every year to be sure that there was some seed money to move forward these Fast Tracks programs in the future. And we'll actually be able to leverage that money in a moment. I'll talk a little bit about the study that RTD is working on. And then also, there's a lot of other things going on with the rail. We're also working with communities along the corridor to complete quiet zones. And we are just finishing up right now our final quiet zones in Broomfield as a part of our commitment to the US 36 corridor communities. So we're very excited about that, and huge effort by our CIP team to work through that, the BNSF and PUC. Next slide. So before I talk about the 2021 updates on Northwest Rail, I wanted to introduce the Front Range Passenger Rail. So the Front Range Passenger Rail was established by SB 17-153 and had two primary functions: to preserve Amtrak Southwest Chief service across Southeast Colorado and also facilitate the development of Front Range Passenger Rail. Next slide, please. And so the Front Range Passenger Rail, which is part of CDOT, working on better understanding all of the studies that had gone on over the last several decades about rail in the Front Range. So they compiled all the studies, they brought on a consultant team, and they started doing an analysis. And so they did an alternatives analysis, and basically some of the key takeaways from that very detailed analysis is that there would be notable demand for rail service across the Front Range, and that demand is higher for communities. There's a substantial demand for recreational, special events, but also commuting as well. The Front Range Passenger Rail ridership projections fared well when compared to other intercity rail lines across the country. So they looked across the nation and looked at similar kinds of services and looked to see where Front Range could possibly fall on that. And we've found a pretty favorable range, and Amtrak is a part of the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. They're very interested in learning more about this corridor in Colorado. You'll see three basic alignments here: the pink, the yellow, and the blue. And so they did an alternatives analysis, and basically these are all kind of a mix and match of different corridors. And one of those could ultimately possibly become the Front Range Passenger Rail. The BNSF corridor is the one noted in blue here, and that's the one that runs through the Broomfield community. Next slide. So back to Northwest Rail in 2021. So what has gone on this year? Dr. Cog and RTD added Northwest Rail to the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, which is a part of the Dr. Cog's federally required regional transportation planning program. The Front Range Passenger Rail alternatives analysis that I just talked about identified the BNSF corridor between Denver, Union Station, and Longmont as one of the most promising ridership potential north of Denver. So looking at those three alignments north of Denver, the preliminary analysis showed it to be very strong and very competitive. The Front Range Passenger Rail also voted on its preference for the BNSF alignment, although further study is federally required. So this was just an alternative analysis, but more study needs to be done to get into the NEPA process. So ultimately, this alignment is not determined until this further study is completed. A couple other landmark pieces here is that SB 21-260 allocated funds to allow the Front Range Passenger Rail to continue the study, so they could further look at what is the best ridership, which are the best alternatives to possibly move forward into that NEPA process. And SB 21-238 allowed for the formation of the Front Range Passenger Rail District. And RTD also this summer has resumed efforts to look at peak rail service. And essentially, RTD will be reevaluating the costs and also looking at those ridership projections that I spoke about earlier that were still big questions back in 2018. So we'll get a chance to dive back into that and really find out some answers to those questions. Next slide. And then so one other thing that we're tracking here in particular is Amtrak's interest in expanding intercity rail throughout the nation. We are tracking that they have proposed funding with the federal government. They've received additional funding through the infrastructure package. They're proposing that they could potentially fund up to 100% of the capital costs of new corridors and so subsidize the initial years of operation. Tracking the federal infrastructure bill and potential to fund this corridor is really key. So we are definitely watching that. Next slide. And so following the, when RTD first realized that they wouldn't be able to deliver on that fast tracks promise, when they thought that they would, they worked with the Northwest area to identify other opportunities for mobility, the Northwest Area Mobility Study. And so CDOT, RTD, and stakeholders all work together to develop this future network of arterial transit. And the purpose was to be able to make improvements that would be complementary to rail. So knowing that rail would not be coming in the immediate future, but this is something that we could work on in the interim. And out of this, State Highway 119, as many of you are aware, was the #1 priority to provide some sort of service to Longmont. That was at the furthest end of the RTD district. Following that, Colorado 7, we'll talk about that in a moment. And that's in various levels of design right now. And there's also many other corridors. So for Broomfield, 120th Avenue is one of those. US 287 north to Longmont. State Highway 42 and South Boulder Road are other key corridors. In addition, the Northwest Area Mobility Study acknowledged that peak rail service is important and that we should look for a phased implementation of rail. So that's all in the NAMS report. Some other components that maybe not be heard of as much, North I-25 reverse managed lanes is also a priority, so getting that reverse commute into Denver. And key issues for Broomfield is knowing that there are some remaining commitments on the fast tracks for Broomfield, that there is a second station park and ride plan at US 36 in Broomfield. That would be another parking structure. Next slide, please. We'll go on to Colorado 7. So over 25 miles from Brighton to Boulder, 8 jurisdictions, as well as others, including our transportation demand management agencies, Community Solutions, Smart Commute Metro North. We have the University CU Boulder, Northwest Chamber Alliance, and also Adams County Economic Partnership is a part of that effort with us. And we've done a lot of work. Next slide, please. So back in 2014, just as we were wrapping up the NAMS study, we've been working on this pretty much concurrently with NAMS. We completed the planning environmental linkage study from US 287 to US 85 in Brighton. And there's just been a lot of work done in the last 3 to 4 years. So there's a lot of momentum here, including those 2 PELs, BRT feasibility study, station planning design, and Broomfield was able to secure funding along with our corridor partners to begin preliminary engineering. I'll talk a little bit more about those projects in a moment. Next slide. And by 2040, so some key facts here about the corridor between Broomfield and Brighton is that we expect 56,000 new residents, 38,000 new jobs. We expect traffic to increase by 37%. And as much as 50 to 60% on the eastern end of the corridor, so Broomfield, Portland, and further east to Brighton. Our initial study, or initial look at bus rapid transit is that we could have somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 passengers a day on the BRT, the bus rapid transit station, once that's fully up and running. Just as a comparison, so the Flatiron Flyer was about 12,000 to 13,000 riders a day pre-pandemic. So not too far off the Flatiron Flyer success there. Next slide. This is an illustrated view from the 2014 Planning Environmental Linkage Study. This is at Huron looking west. So you can see that there are 3 lanes of traffic as well as a shoulder and accompanying turn lane, medians, landscaping, and the multi-use path. Next slide, please. And here's just another look at the planned road segments here. So at the top is at Sheridan looking west towards Boulder. So there'd be 2 lanes in each direction plus that shoulder. And then the graphic below would be Sheridan looking east, and that'd be 3 lanes of traffic heading to I-25. Subsequent studies from the 2014, we were just starting to think about bus rapid transit at the time. We were just wrapping up NAMS. At the time, it mentioned it could be a bike lane or a shoulder here for transit. And ultimately, in the subsequent studies, identified that this would be a really great opportunity for buses to run when it's congested. It's a bus running shoulder, as well as operate for turn lanes. The bikes would be on the multi-use path that would be available on both sides. Next slide, please. And I'll go about, so right now I'll talk about the 3 major projects that we're working on right now. We'll cover these all in more detail. So the first bucket, next slide, please, is we are currently working on a project with CDOT. Broomfield is taking the lead on this to do a capacity project to increase capacity between Sheridan and I-25. Essentially, we'd create at least 2 through lanes in each direction and accommodating turn lanes, and this is all going to be highly coordinated with the current projects that are going on with development. And so we're just getting started. Council recently approved that contract, so we're just getting started on that, and hope to be done with that late next year. Next slide, please. This is the $10 million project to start preliminary engineering. Again, we're just pulling in all the pieces from the last several years, from all the plans, the studies, and actually putting pen to paper and getting that preliminary engineering done. So next slide, please. There's a lot of components to this. So not only doing preliminary engineering, but as stakeholders and along with the Colorado 7 Coalition, that would be important to set up a corridor development plan to really lay out, what are we going to be the first pieces, because there's just no way we're going to have $350,000 to get the whole corridor done at once. We're going to have to chunk this off. So what's the most important thing? So we developed a corridor development plan. I'll talk a little bit more about those components. We're also doing some aerial LiDAR, which is already underway right now with CDOT. We're going to be developing a technology deployment plan corridor, a corridor bicycle plan to be sure we have cohesive components across the corridor for a consistent bicycle facility, ultimately connecting Brighton and Boulder. We're going to start some environmental analysis, as well as develop a corridor communications plan along with our transportation demand management agencies. And then $7 million will be focused on the preliminary engineering aspects itself and concept studies for unresolved issues. Next slide. This is just a graphic that is in the corridor development plan, and it just shows all of the moving pieces that we're going to be working on for the corridor between Brighton and Boulder. Next slide. And this is, those are those pieces that are shown there in the map. So we call these segments of independent utility. So specifically for Broomfield, the pieces that we're going to be working on for preliminary engineering is the Lowell intersection, as well as preliminary engineering between Sheridan and I-25 to that ultimate configuration. We're also working on a concept plan to identify where that station is going to go in Broomfield along Colorado 7. So bringing together the development community and working with CDOT, working with RTD, and just really figuring out where that station is going to go. So we're really looking forward to that. And where we are in the process is we're pulling together the scope of work, CDOT's putting together the project teams, and we'll be getting ready to go on those projects pretty soon here. Next slide. And then so this is in the corridor development plan. This is some different ways that we looked at everything that still needs to be done to get the projects going. So looking at unresolved planning issues, for example, where is that station going to go in Broomfield? Advancing design issues for preliminary environmental analysis, and also managing for a predictable future for the corridor. These were key components that the stakeholders decided were important. Next slide. So let's see here. As a part of the corridor development plan, the BRT playbook was included. And so recommended improvements as a part of the project we spoke about was that running way for transit. So exclusive transit lanes from Boulder to US 287. And then east of there will be shared use shoulders east of Lafayette into Broomfield. So that is how the transit would operate on an arterial corridor. to enhance operations of that. We'd be looking at intersection provisions such as bus queue jump lanes and major intersections so that the buses can bypass that traffic. And then there's also 15 planned stations that we had looked at in that BRT design based off of the feasibility study, as well as the mobility hub. So also looking at the supporting person final mile access and looking at bringing out microtransit infrastructure into the system. TOD is also an important component that was stressed in the BRT playbook. So making sure that we have transit supportive densities along the corridor. It doesn't have to be at every single piece along the corridor, but focusing on nodes and supporting transit near those stations is important. Next slide here. And so here's the timeline of that preliminary engineering project that we're working on with CDOT, the $10 million Dr. Cog project. Right now, we're in that procurement and contract phase, as I mentioned, and we're just getting ready to start on all of these projects at the end of this year and going full steam starting next year. Next slide. So related to Colorado 7 is the mobility hub, and this has three major components: the I-25 component with the managed lanes, the diverging diamond interchange, as well as the transit hub features. So there's just three major components that need to all come together to make this hub work. Next slide. But that's a pretty big price tag at the moment, over $200 million to bring all those pieces together, including the I-25 component. So in the interim, CDOT is advancing interim transit access improvements, and recently Commissioner Stewart came by council to let them know about this effort that CDOT is working on. So $2 million have been dedicated to design, and this is out of the SB 267 year 3 funds, as well as some funding dedicated to SB 260, including $12 million to construct these interim transit improvements. And what you're looking at here is Colorado 7 going east and west. Right below that is a new pedestrian bridge. Currently, there are no sidewalk facilities across that interchange, as many of you know. And highlighted in orange are 2 slip ramps on the south side of Colorado 7. So essentially, the buses would slip off of I-25, drop off passengers, and then continue across Colorado 7 and back onto I-25, very similar to the flat iron station configuration. Again, this would just be an interim. It would be a way to get transit access, especially from I-25. You see in the corner there is the Thornton corner where Lark Ridge is, and this would be where some of the first facilities would be built for a parking lot, as well as potentially a place for transit to interact with the I-25. So potentially being able to bring transit in Colorado East from Boulder County, and this would be the next logical place to bring transit riders. Other things that would be included, obviously, is not only the park and ride facilities, but sidewalk connectivity, and then other potential items that we'd be looking at. You know, how do we accommodate person final mile, such as taxi accommodations, and also looking at electric vehicle charging stations. Next slide. And then on to I-25 North. So the big thing here is that there's still obviously some missing pieces here of I-25 North. And CDOT and HPTE recently received an unsolicited proposal for I-25. And that is something that is going under review with CDOT and HPTE. Something to look out for council is just looking at what components are included, and if there's potential for the unsolicited proposal to also support improvements at the Colorado 7 interchange. Again, there's those 3 components with the not only the I-25, the transit, but also the interchange improvements, which would be needed to help with the flow on I-25. Working with CDOT staff, that interchange would be reaching failing levels of service, meaning for vehicles, not structurally, but for vehicles by the end of the decade. So it's something we need to keep an eye on, especially as there's ever increasing growth and that change. Next slide. And so I wanted to make sure I touched on some of these other Northwest area mobility corridors, particularly for Broomfield. There's actually quite a bit going on that. We're going to be starting a multimodal and safety study with CDOT, supported by the Broomfield Transportation Forum, to look at how we can improve multimodal safety and access along that corridor in Broomfield. But we also have some capital projects going on. We did secure some Safer Main Streets funding from CDOT last year to improve side paths along some of those missing segments there in 120th, as well as some of those transit access improvements. And we're also working on a CIP project between Teller and Quay, and that's a sidewalk and utility project. So what's going on there? US 287, Boulder County is looking at a multimodal study, and they're going to be wrapping up some of those recommendations very soon. And I know we have a meeting soon with the US 287 Coalition to talk about some of those suggestions. This was a very preliminary look. It was minimally funded, and Boulder County is looking at a phase 2. So we're looking forward to those next steps. Identifying opportunities to preserve facilities for BRT system and improving mechanical access and safety. And these are expected to follow State Highway 119 and Colorado 7 in investment. And I say that because Colorado 7 has been in the works for a long time, since 2014. So all of these corridors all are moving forward, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of that funding in the next slide. Next slide, please. So these are just the last couple of slides here. I wanted to make sure I touched on the CDOT 10-year plan. This effort began back in 2019 and was completed in the summer of 2020. CDOT did a roadshow and visited all 64 counties, including Broomfield. Did a very robust public engagement process across the state. And this 10-year plan is now funded by SB 260. Back when they wrote this plan and when it was adopted last summer, you see years 5 to 10 in quotes over there, because they weren't sure about that funding, but now that funding is more secure there with SB 260 in the works. And I point an arrow here at the I-25 Colorado Mobility Hub, and this is where that project was identified in the plan, and we are moving forward with CDOT to advance the Colorado 7 Mobility Hub interim improvements. Overall, these all listed here are Northwest Area Mobility Study improvements. These are priorities that have been identified by Broomfield and our neighbors over, I believe it's $130 million of investment over the next 10 years, including Colorado 7, 120th Avenue, US 287, as well as other funding opportunities such as grants that can go after for our priority projects. Next slide, and I believe this is the last one. So thanks for hanging in there. The Dr. Cog 2050 Metro Vision and Regional Transportation Plan that was adopted earlier this year. I wanted to call out that over the next several decades, about $2 billion is identified in this Regional Transportation Plan, which is a federally required plan to show where our region wants to put our limited dollars towards these critical corridors. So this includes Colorado 7, I-25 North, the Mobility Hub, US 287, 120th Avenue, and Northwest Rail actually makes the list for the first time in the Regional Transportation Plan. So yeah, we're very excited about that. And that is my update. And if you have any questions, next slide, please. Wait, that's the last one. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. That was a very thorough presentation. So I'm going to assume that my colleagues do not have any questions. Or not. So we'll take council member questions and comments right now. Who would like to start us off? Councilmember Chef.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Ms. Grant, for your thorough presentation. It covered a lot of areas and many conversations. I think that many of us up here have continued to have, whether in our own specific areas, Colorado 7, 287, or on the Broomfield Regional Transportation Forum, which I think is one of those in which we've collectively gotten more updates throughout the year. So I think that's been a great addition to this conversation. So I really kind of have just two areas. One of them is the US 36 100 Flyers ridership. And you had talked about how ridership is down. And I'm curious if you can tell us if the service has also been decreased on the Flatiron Flyer route.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. That's a great question. The Flatiron Flyer service, I believe, is about 50%, 50 to 60% what it was before the pandemic. So as I mentioned, I believe it was 10 to 15% of ridership last summer and approximately 25% of the ridership this summer.
Thanks. And I believe that riders or service levels in general on RTD is down, and they're expecting to come back to about 85% service levels when, you know, in the foreseeable future. Is that number correct?
The exact number is, I don't think exactly determined by RTD, but somewhere in that ballpark. I don't think they anticipate they can bring back full service anytime soon. They are monitoring ridership, but they're also experiencing significant shortages in operators at the moment. And so that is also impacting their efforts to bring service back online. But my understanding is that they're looking at ridership across the district, looking at where they need to add service. And so I do know the Flatiron Flyer is one of those areas that they are looking at and watching for changes in ridership.
Great. Well, I know that the Flatiron Flyer is one of those that is continuing to buck the trends, the whole US 36 corridor, whether it's the express lanes, decreased congestion, increased travel speeds, decreased travel times. Those continue to buck the trends on many other high performing roads around the state. And so the Flatiron Flyer contributes to that. So it'll be interesting to see how that ridership does continue to increase, and we'll see if that service levels continue to increase as well. With the Dr. Cog TIP awards, you had alluded that we have some of those awards coming. One of those is going to be a pilot program and a study that we were going to be implementing here on Brookfield. I was curious that as we start to look at those ARPA funds, the American Rescue Program funds, if some of those can be used for more pilot programs and studies around in Brookfield. We've talked about you know, the northern part of our quadrant not having access to transit. Right now we have the Brookfield Town Square being discussed, and there isn't really opportunities for transit from the north to access that. Is there a possibility to use those ARPA funds for something like that, where it would be a pilot program and a study to kind of see how that could be utilized into the future?
I need to get back to you on that, Councilmember Schaaf. Again, the requirements that we know right now until the Treasury comes out and everybody continues to wait for what the specifics are, but it has to be spent in the most impacted communities. So we'll have to, if a study qualifies, and if it does, what the pilot project would have to, what the end goal or result would be from that pilot project for those most impacted individuals in the community.
Okay, all right, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'll look for some more information on that. I'm glad that we continue to move the Northwest Rail program. It's great to see that our region continues to stand behind that, and completing that in phases, I guess, is where we are right now, in terms of continuing to push for the peak rail service. We're opting that to potentially get a lot of that infrastructure costs completed with the partnership between the Front Range Passenger Rail and potentially Amtrak, and continuing to move that forward. So that's very exciting, and I think that that's something that our community continues to warrant. So thank you for your continued conversations with all the stakeholders in that. And thank you to my council colleagues for continuing to stand by the Northwest Rail as well. So that's all the comments I have. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. Okay, Councilmember Anderson next.
It's getting too late. Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. This is, you know, the more times you see these this presentation, like especially it continues like Colorado 7, it's like the more it sets in, and the more it has so much information. And this is I prefer the slide presentation versus the I'm trying to go through the packet. That's a lot of information, a lot of dates. But just two questions. Could you explain? You mentioned an unsolicited proposal on I-25, and that makes sense on a toll road. What is an unsolicited proposal on a non-toll road? Like, who's proposing that? How do you pay that back?
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. Thank you for that question. So my understanding is the unsolicited proposal came from a private company, and they are looking to complete the remaining pieces of North I-25 while taking a slice of that managed lane toll revenue. And so all of these are still under deep negotiation and discussion of CDOT and HPTD. We don't even know if they will accept the unsolicited proposal. They're still reviewing it and looking at those numbers and diving in more deeply into those.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then on the last slide, you, with all these dates that are way out to like 2030 and beyond, and it said staging period, or what is that, that last column? What are those dates? Is that the date where it starts, or is that the period where it's completed, or what is staging?
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. So that would be under the Dr. Cog slide. Thank you, Jake. So that staging period is when that project would be anticipated to be complete. And so we look at the TIP in 10-year increments. I'm sorry, the regional transportation plan in 10-year increments, and then the transportation improvement program is in 4-year increments leading up to that. With the transportation improvement program, we can look at the decade leading up to the staging period to do preliminary engineering efforts. So we can tee up those projects for construction in that decade.
Okay, thank you. And that's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. I missed, Councilmember Hinkle, did you have your hand up? I don't know if I missed it or not. I saw a bunch of hands raised all at once. Is it a yes?
Scratching my shoulder. No mispronouncing.
You did have a question.
Calling on me? Is that
I am. You are up if you are ready.
Thank you. This is all great information, and I feel like every time we talk about transportation, I am still soaking it all in. So it's like overwhelming for me. I like to take each project, by each one, what is the demand and what is, what's going to happen once this is implemented, what problems are we solving? So I would like to eventually, get to that point. And then I have two questions. One came from a person who had concerns about the Jefferson Parkway, but I don't know, Jennifer's here. I don't know if we can talk about that. I'll ask that one second. But the first one is just that people are having a hard time, figuring out how to bike on these roads. So we can make all these roads for biking. Is there any plan, like spending wise, on education on? Because I've had people that say, yeah, that Highway 7 looks really great. If we could bike on there or close to there, what does that look like? How do we educate people on feeling more safe when we are biking? And what would your suggestion be? Or not suggestion, sorry, you're just, your understanding of what we can do as far as educating people on how to utilize those bike lanes. Because it seems like we have these bike lanes and we have people complaining on the sidewalks of not using it. And I know this is kind of a sidetrack of what we're actually talking about tonight. But what part of our money is being spent on education on multimodal transport?
Thank you for your question, Councilmember Hinkle. Currently, we don't have any education programs directly serviced by Broomfield for bicycle education, but we do have resources that could be leveraged with our transportation demand management agencies. They do focus on the more programmatic level, such as education, as well as there are other resources out there, such as Bicycle Colorado, that offer educational classes. So at this time, Broomfield itself is not, providing any of those services, but potentially something we could look at partnerships with our partners.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, because I want to make sure that we're using the lanes that we're spending money on. The second thing is that someone just had a question about the Jefferson Parkway, and they saw it on our agenda, and they just wanted to know if we, have heard anything from Jefferson Parkway and what that might look like in the future, or if we can even speak to it.
Councilmember Hinkle, we have not heard anything and don't have an update for council at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hinkle. We have Councilmember Groom next.
Thank you very much. I have limited questions because I think that was a very informative presentation, and I agree you're an amazing presenter, but I also want to tell a little story about you that I'm very impressed upon, that our transportation resource in this grant is not only, she walks the walk, where she also uses public transportation on a daily basis, and I've been to meetings at various places with her, And she is always using public transportation. So she's not only engaged in it, she lives it and she experiences it. So I appreciate that insight, and I think it brings a world of usefulness in your job and in your role to live it. With that being said, I think we focus a lot on our main artery transportation, and that was a great presentation of an update of the future, the foreseeable future. What about some of our current RTD routes in our community, just internally? I know some of our residents struggle getting from point E to point B within Broomfield, and we do have kind of a blackout area in the north. Do we have any intentions to build services there, and maybe not even with RTD, but our current Broomfield services?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Groom. So for, since the pandemic, service was significantly cut for our local routes in Broomfield, in particular, Route 128 that you may all be familiar with, from Broomfield Station to Wagon Road, mostly along Midway and also Westlake Drive, and then heading over into Westminster. That service was suspended. We did remain service on Route 120 between Broomfield and Wagon Road, essentially a direct connection along 120th Avenue. We were able to get Saturday service on that right before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, basically only routes that were allowed to stay were those with weekend service. So fortunately, we were able to retain that, and it's been operating hourly. I do believe that RTD wants to bring back that peak hour morning and evening to 30 minutes and really strengthen that route and ridership. In regards to other services provided by RTD, the Flex Ride service is available in the Interlochen area, and as well as Broomfield to about 144th Avenue. As you mentioned, there's no service north there. But we did receive funding as a part of the Broomfield Transportation Forum, approved that grant. And that with RTD, we are looking to expand operational hours. So we do want to bring more buses on board to help out with that peak hour in and out of the stations for that first and final mile access, as well as help students get to school. We do find during the school year that students do use that service. And part of that grant is looking at expanding boundaries. And so that's a continuing conversation with RTD. It's been a challenge with the pandemic. That service was brought down to only one bus, but we are bringing back that second bus, and I'm hoping to bring that third grant funded bus online, hopefully next year.
Perfect, thank you. And then any insight into looking into futuristic cars, you know, the cars without the driver for transportation? I know we talked about it on the transportation forum a few years back. We were considering what that would look like. I know we were looking at what Las Vegas was doing with some of their testing facilities. Is that still in conversation for Broomfield?
So with autonomous vehicles, it's just something that we are monitoring with our regional partners, and as that technology comes on board, CDOT was very interested in that technology with the previous administration, and I haven't heard any updates. It is something that we are monitoring, and I think it is something that we are looking at with future technology plans for corridors, and how do autonomous vehicles integrate with that vehicle to infrastructure technology. That they do see being a part of that future.
Perfect, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councilmember Groom. Maybe Councilmember Lim up next.
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce the interest in the first and final mile connectivity. I had the opportunity to help facilitate the ACES Sustainability in-person workshop on the 26th. And so we had ACES is doing a series of citizen engagement on all the sustainability issues before they bring the impact analysis to council. But when I was facilitating it that day, in the transportation area, first and final mile connectivity was well, we were putting dots on the things that get most interest, and that received the most dots of the people who were present at that workshop. So it is interesting to think about what we could do to further those endeavors. Can you speculate on what else we could do with possible funding?
Great, thank you, Councilmember Lemon. That's a great question. So the US 36 First and Final study outlined many strategies to deploy. Some of those we've already implemented, such as wayfinding on the US 36 corridor itself. We are currently working on wayfinding right now in Broomfield with some of that transportation improvement program money approved by the forum. So feeding in from our neighborhoods into the corridors, we heard in our pedestrian bicycle assessment, that was really important as far as wayfinding destinations. And so we're just starting that public engagement effort, and I anticipate that we will hear that still continuing to be of importance. We're working on that first and final mile secure bicycle parking so that people can leave their bicycles at the station, whether it be overnight or during the day, depending on which way their commute is. They know they can leave their bike there for an extended period of time, and there would be another layer of security for it. We've been working on a lot of capital improvements, the overpasses, the underpasses. We're working on some key corridors such as Industrial Lane. We also secured funding for 112th Avenue. So removing barriers to the US 36 corridor is really key. It's something we heard loud and clear in the pedestrian bicycle assessment, because the bikeway itself is on the south side of US 36, and most of Broomfield is on the north or the east side of US 36. Some other components included were looking at perhaps micromobility. You know, what are some options for people to get to the stations if they don't bring a bike with them, because they borrow a bike. In addition, looking at transportation demand management programs, I think is an opportunity that we can work with our transportation demand management organizations more with working with our local employers and working with those employees, letting them know what their resources are, and learning from them what their barriers are, and working to address those issues on a detailed level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. Councilmember Lindsted.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just first wanted to thank you, Ms. Grant, for the wonderful presentation. After all the transportation forums we've been doing together for the last long while, I totally agree with Manager Hoffman about your presentation skills. You just boiled down about, I don't know, 100 hours, 150 hours of meetings into about 10 minutes. And I'm really, really impressed. Could you just give a brief update on the Midway multimodal plan timeline for the thousands watching at home and in the audience?
Thank you, Councilmember Lindsted. That's a great question. Although Midway Boulevard is not a part of our regional transportation planning efforts, it's a very important corridor to us locally. But it is a program that we were able to fund with our Broomfield Forum supporting, looking at a multimodal plan for the entire corridor in Broomfield, east to west, and also connecting to our region active transportation corridors identified by the Denver Regional Council of Governments, such as the Trail, just 1,008 feet to the east of Broomfield. So how do people get there? And then the Lake Brewing Trail, and obviously US 36 on the western end. Right now, we are just getting started on our engagement efforts. We just launched the Broomfield Voice page, so go to broomfieldvoice.com/midway plan and provide your input. We've had a map live for a couple of weeks now, and at last count, we had over 100 comments already. So really robust engagement, and we're looking forward to even more. We have a few workshops coming up on the week of September 20th. We have 3 workshops planned, 2 in the evening, 1 in the middle of the day. So all those dates are in the Broomfield Voice, and they will be held virtually and will also be recorded so anyone can view them later and give us some input. And we'll also be at Broomfield Days, soliciting input from people visiting us at Midway Park. So that's just the first phase, and then we'll be rolling into some, we're taking all that feedback and developing some alternatives in the winter, and then in the spring, we'll be looking at bringing to the forum a plan and kind of bringing down those action plans and how we move forward to implement some of those key strategies.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess with that, all I have to say is, yeah, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for being such a incredible regional resource for our neighboring communities who I know call upon you a lot. So thanks for that. And the last thing I'll say is our next Brookfield Transportation Forum meeting is on October 8th at 1 o'clock, and it will run until 3:30. So if you're interested in learning more about the specifics on a lot of these items, zoom in, and hope to see everyone there. Hopefully everyone on council, but I guess we'll see on the 8th. So thanks so much, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindsted and Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thanks for the great presentation, Ms. Grant. This is probably for overall staff. I have a question with regard to the ARPA funds, and are we working in tandem with the other committees that could benefit from the ARPA funds? And because I'm thinking, can't really talk about affordable housing if it doesn't have the transportation to go with it. And I was looking at those areas where maybe housing could be provided in those transit areas that Ms. Grant was talking about.
I think once we receive the specifics, Councilmember Tessier, that will further the conversation.
Okay, cool. Thank you, because I just see a lot of opportunity here. And I really appreciate you also going after so many grants too. Like the work that you do chasing grants to make transportation accessible is extraordinary. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tessier. Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I do want to thank you, Ms. Grant, for your presentation today. Transportation, not nearly as splashy or as emotional issue as our civic center or housing as we had today, but definitely vitally important to our citizens. It affects almost each and every one of us. It's one of those things I think you don't hear about when it's going well, and you only hear about it when things aren't working. So I do appreciate your work on that. And just a couple of really quick questions. I may have missed it somewhere in your presentation. The sort of new iteration of the Northwest Rail and the single track line, if that ever does happen, is there any kind of anticipated timeline as to when we'd actually see that?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I think that a lot will be revealed over the next couple of years as the Front Range Passenger Rail goes into further study, which SB 260 did allow for further study to go into that pre-NEPA analysis and really define what that corridor would be. If the Northwest Rail alignment is the preferred alignment that comes out of that study, I think perhaps the stars could really align for further coordination between CDOT, Front Range Passenger Rail, that operator, whoever that may be, possibly Amtrak and RTD to really see that corridor to fruition. So it's something we're hoping for, but as I mentioned previously, that study needs to be done and they do need to follow all the federal requirements. But the ridership is looking very promising, at least in the alternatives analysis that was conducted back in 2020.
And so, I mean, if things did go well, best case scenario, would it be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, I couldn't put a date on it at this time. But hopefully over the next couple of years, and also when they complete the study, and also it really depends on other federal funding sources as well, because we certainly can't pull this off alone as a part of being RTD or even the state itself. So we would definitely be looking for federal funding sources to help us pull off this major transportation project.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is not in the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
Not in the immediate future.
Okay. The only question or maybe question / comment that I would have was, you did mention, I think one of your first slides that the ridership on the I guess it was on along the US 36 is most of the mass transit is down right now significantly. And I guess my gut is, and it sounded like that you guys are studying it, or RTD is studying this right now. You know, whether it's because people aren't working downtown anymore. I think I just read an article that that still hasn't bounced back. We're still, I think it's at 25% of pre-COVID levels. And then also maybe people are just still not comfortable riding on mass transit Have you seen or do you know, are people though driving as much as they did pre-COVID? Are people on the roads or just not taking mass transit?
Thank you, Mayor Prashant. That's a good question. Generally, the traffic levels have generally bounced back, but we've been seeing changes in the pattern. So generally not quite as peaky as they were before in the morning and the evening. We're seeing more midday traffic as well. And so it's just something that we're continuing to watch and monitor. And you're correct that many people maybe have not returned fully to the office yet. So that is impacting, especially the commuter-related services.
Yeah, I was gonna wonder, is the change in patterns and then more shorter routes, people going from their homes to the stores more than going from their homes to downtown Denver or downtown Boulder?
I don't have quite all the local details on that in Brookfield, but anecdotally, some people are staying closer to home.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I think that takes me to the comment that I would reemphasize from Councilmember Lynn, that first mile, last mile connectivity. You know, if patterns have changed and people are commuting to Boulder and Denver, maybe they're just commuting more within their own community and need to really focus on that maybe more than sort of the long haul commutes. That's just my, like, I don't know, that's your area of expertise. Any other additional comments or questions? Well, thank you, Ms. Grant, again for your presentation. We appreciate all the hard work that you put into this.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you.
This concludes the agenda items for this evening study session. There being no further business, the study session is adjourned.